Chapter 148. Towards Lu Feng's arrival, these people also revealed a kind smile. However, it was only a slight smile between them. They did not come over to greet him. Lu Feng naturally would not ignore the kindness of these people. After returning the same smile, he began to look for his own cultivation technique. This was the outermost area. There were only 1 or 2 types of martial skill essences that could be smelted. Lu Feng had already condensed, zoned only into an advanced cultivation technique. If he wanted to advance further, he would need the true essence of martial skill that was unique to advanced cultivation technique. However, the true essence of martial skill was exclusive to advanced cultivation technique. His authority was limited to the beginner and intermediate cultivation technique areas. Therefore, Lu Feng had no way of viewing advanced cultivation technique. He could only slowly condense the true essence of martial skill by searching for those martial skill essences. Condensing hundreds of martial skill essences into one would be a perfect martial skill essence. Condensing 10 perfect martial skill essences would be a supreme true essence of martial skill. In order for, zoned only, to have unlimited potential, Lu Feng condensed the true essence of martial skill to be the supreme true essence of martial skill. Therefore, the martial skill essences that he needed must be perfect martial skill essences. It was a pity that perfect martial skill essences were not easy to condense, and intermediate cultivation techniques that could fuse perfect martial skill essences were extremely rare. Just like that, Lu Feng continued to wander around and spent 2 hours flipping through hundreds of intermediate cultivation techniques. However, among these cultivation techniques, he only found 2 intermediate cultivation techniques that contained perfect martial skill essences. Among these 2 intermediate cultivation techniques, one of them was a cultivation technique that could increase one's strength by 2 times. It contained 2 perfect martial skill essences. The other was a cultivation technique that could increase one's strength by 3 times. However, there was only 1 type of martial skill essences. Seeing that he had only explored 1/10 of the area, Lu Feng sighed helplessly. In 2 hours, I only found 3 perfect martial skill essences. At this rate, it would not be easy to find 10 perfect martial skill essences in a day. Even if I found them, it would take a lot of time to comprehend and condense them. Perhaps I won't be able to complete the tripling of zoned only today. Looking at the core area, Lu Feng also had a slight impulse. He knew that in the core area, there were some middle-grade cultivation techniques with a higher degree of enhancement. Naturally, the probability of a perfect martial skill essence appearing was also much higher. But in the end, Lu Feng still didn't go over. Although the probability of those cultivation techniques appearing is very high, the degree of amplification has increased by so much, and the difficulty of comprehending them has increased by too much. It's really inappropriate to waste so much time trying to comprehend it. Lu Feng found those cultivation techniques with perfect martial skill essences, but he still needed to completely comprehend these cultivation techniques before he could extract the martial skill essences from them. He was able to comprehend those with a lower degree of amplification very quickly, but every time the amplification doubled, the difficulty of comprehension would more than double. In this case, Lu Feng might as well waste some time to find what he needed among the intermediate cultivation methods that had a lower degree of amplification. In the end, Lu Feng didn't enter the core area. He just kept searching in the periphery. Time passed slowly. However, the number of people on the 2nd floor of the cultivation technique pavilion did not decrease at all. The few people that Lu Feng had met previously didn't leave. After all, warriors were different from psychics. Their bodies were abnormally strong, and they didn't care about not sleeping for an entire night. So, until the next morning, these people didn't leave. When it was past 7 in the morning, Lu Feng finally found the last perfect martial skill essence that he needed. What Lu Feng found was a total of 7 mid-grade cultivation techniques. These amplifications were 2 times, and none of them exceeded 3 times. Naturally, for Lu Fenglai, who was already a high-level warrior, it was quite easy for him to comprehend them. He didn't waste any time and directly flipped through a cultivation technique and began to slowly comprehend it. In the sky above the divine plateau star ocean, Lu Feng, who had transformed into his spirit body, sat quietly and motionlessly. However, this state didn't last long. Soon, the tightly shut spirit body Lu Feng opened his eyes. A hint of joy appeared on the virtual face. As expected, after manifesting my spirit body, my comprehension speed has increased by many times. Before manifesting my spirit body, I would have needed a day to comprehend an intermediate cultivation technique at the level of a normal high-level warrior. If I were to find high-level warriors with a bit of talent, I wouldn't have succeeded without 3 or 4 months. But now I used less than 2 hours. This speed is more than 100 times faster than those ordinary geniuses. I believe that even the geniuses at the level of the Federation would be more than 10 times slower than me. Comprehension required comprehension, and what was closely related to comprehension was the spirit. It was a pity that a warrior's spirit was far inferior to a psychic's. Lu Feng had the most abnormal psychic talent in all of history, and his spirit was also incomparably shocking. In addition, he had cultivated the divine plateau that was condensed from the primordial scripture. Lu Feng was confident that in terms of comprehension, even the genius-level warriors of the Federation and psychic grandmasters couldn't compare to him. This was one of Lu Feng's greatest advantages. Without any hesitation, Lu Feng returned to the real world and once again took out an intermediate-level cultivation method and began to comprehend it. Soon, at 8 o'clock in the evening, Lu Feng had already comprehended all 7 intermediate cultivation techniques. The essence of the perfect cultivation techniques that had been smelted had been completely refined. Seeing that there was still a lot of time left, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and immediately started smelting. At this moment, in the sky above the divine prairie star ocean, Lu Feng once again sank into a deep state of comprehension. However, he didn't realize that while he was concentrating on comprehending, the calm divine prairie star ocean below him was tumbling violently. Whoosh, it's finally done. Everything is finally done after 4 hours. After 4 hours, Lu Feng had finally finished condensing the cultivation technique. Now, his cultivation technique, soul supremacy, had condensed the true essence of 2 ultimate cultivation techniques. The degree of increase had also doubled. This was definitely good news for Lu Fenglai. After all, the evolution of soul supremacy meant that Lu Feng's strength had doubled once again. Although he was still a novice advanced warrior, he didn't fear any advanced warriors anymore. Even if he faced a peak advanced warrior of the Federation level, Lu Feng was confident that he wouldn't be at a disadvantage by relying on his special means. If I can enter the initial stage of the second stage of the Origin Sutra, the Fusion Spirit Realm, with the help of Dao Songtian during this holiday and raise my cultivation level to that of a peak advanced psychic master, then I'll be able to train my physical body. When the time comes, I'll find an opportunity to return to the Lu family and comprehend the intermediate part of the Human King Manual, as well as everything about the realm. Then, I'm afraid that my combat strength will continue to increase. Although he didn't like to have too much involvement with the Lu family, Lu Feng wasn't a pedantic person. Since he had already learned the Human King Manual, then there was no need to be coy about it. The Human King Manual is the supreme code left behind by the ancestor, the Human King. It's one of the 3 most powerful royal manuals since ancient times. Its power is absolutely incredible. Since I've already learned it, then there's absolutely no reason to give it up. For this reason, it's necessary to owe the Lu family some favors. The intermediate part of the Human King Manual touched on the realm. It was important to know that whether it was the quality or the realm, they could only be comprehended after becoming a warrior. However, the Human King manual opened up a different path, allowing the bloodline of the Lu family to comprehend it in advance. The increase in combat strength like this was definitely an incredible number. Standing up and looking at the dark sky outside, Lu Feng stretched his body with all his might. I'm going to the capital administrative planet tomorrow. I don't know if Dao Songtian can help me comprehend the initial stage of the fusion spirit realm. Although he knew about Dao Songtian's greatness, Lu Feng still didn't have a real concept of it. The existence of the Origin Sutra was really too strange. It was a supreme technique that wasn't inferior to the Human King manual. Although he didn't feel any problems with it, Lu Feng still didn't dare to be too sure before he actually practiced it. Seeing that there was nothing else to do, Lu Feng didn't continue to stay. Turning around, Lu Feng walked towards the stairs. A twofold increase is not bad. However, if I want to continue smelting, then I'll have to find the principle. After all, if I condense it step by step, the speed is really too slow. The best way is to find a high-grade cultivation technique to comprehend. The exit was slowly approaching, but Lu Feng was still thinking about his future plans. However, when he felt that the exit was close at hand, Lu Feng suddenly stopped in his tracks. At this moment, his expression was incomparably ugly. He turned around and looked at his surroundings. It seemed that nothing had changed, but Lu Feng didn't really see it that way. At this moment, in addition to being incomparably ugly, there was also a trace of anxiety and a trace of fear. How is this possible? Everything was quiet, as if nothing had changed. However, Lu Feng's heart was in a perilous situation, because at this moment, he realized that he was actually lost. Lost in the pavilion on the second floor. It was very funny and inconceivable, but Lu Feng knew that he was really lost. Who is it? Who is it? Lu Feng roared. He wanted to transmit his voice, but he realized that everything was in vain, because after shouting for a long time, the entire second floor was still as quiet as before. Behind him, the stairs leading to the first floor were there. However, Lu Feng didn't move a single step. This was because he knew that even if he hurried with all his might, even if he spent a day, a year, 10 years, or 1,000,000 years, he definitely wouldn't be able to cover the distance of a few steps. Taking out the crystal that Lu Tao had given him before he left, Lu Feng crushed it directly. He wanted to call for his father in the distant space to descend. However, after a long time after the crystal was crushed, everything was still the same as before. The isolation here actually completely blocked the power of the God Slayer. Chapter 149. Lu Feng felt that he had fallen into an absolute danger, or even a hopeless situation. Just now, although he was thinking of a plan, Lu Feng did not put all his attention on it. Until now, Lu Feng had taken a total of 144 steps. Previously, according to his visual estimation, he only needed to take less than 80 steps to reach the first floor of the staircase. Now, he had taken an extra 64 steps and still had not reached it. This explained the problem. Previously, after discovering the problem, Lu Feng started calculating from the 142nd to the 134th step. He realized that although the final steps did not waste any time, the actual distance walked was decreasing proportionally. If this continued, at about the 157th step, which was the staircase, he would not be able to move forward even a millimeter. Even if he was moving forward, the result would still be the same. At this time, Lu Feng already knew that he was obviously lost, and had entered a spatial trap. Lu Feng had heard of this kind of trap a long time ago, and now Lu Feng finally saw it. However, although he saw all this, Lu Feng did not feel happy at all. This was because he understood that someone must have set up all this to target him. However, who was it? This was the Federal University Cymbidium branch. If it was in the past, it would not be a big deal. However, it was different now. Because Li Tianlai had not left yet. Li Tianlai was a demigod. He was a terrifying powerhouse that could change the color of the entire world and make it tremble under the pressure of the limit. To be able to do all this under his nose, then the strength of the person who came, could it be God? He gritted his teeth and said a word. Other than God, Lu Feng could not think of any other possibility. At this moment, Lu Feng felt a little hopeless. If it was only a venerable martial artist, then even if it was a martial artist who had surpassed the evolution stage, Lu Feng would not give up and despair. However, if his opponent was a god, no matter how crazy Lu Feng was or how heaven-defying he was, he knew that he was in danger. Furthermore, this space restriction had rendered the crystals that his father had given him useless. This meant that this person's strength was unimaginably powerful. For a long time, the entire second floor of the pavilion did not change at all. It was so empty that it made one's heart flutter, and it was filled with a sense of oppression. As for Lu Feng, he just stood there quietly. Unknowingly, sweat had already flowed down his cheek. But he didn't dare to wipe it, because Lu Feng knew that the enemy might appear in the next moment. He knew that even if he was on full alert, he would not be a match for a god, or even a super god. However, Lu Feng still raised all of his essence, energy, and spirit to the highest level. Finally, the surroundings began to change. Everything began to blur and gradually disappear. After an unknown amount of time, everything disappeared. Originally, he was standing in the cultivation technique pavilion on the second floor. However, when everything disappeared, Lu Feng found himself in an empty and dark environment where he could see everything clearly. This is actually. His eyes were filled with a trace of horror. Regarding the changes in the surrounding environment, others might not know, but Lu Feng understood. This was space displacement. This was a space displacement that only those peerless and terrifying experts who had comprehended the laws could create. Legend had it that the existence of gods had already come into contact with space. They could tear the void at will, open a space tunnel, and through the distorted space-time connection, they could use a method of connecting different places to enter a distant area. However, ordinary gods could only open a wormhole. They did not have the strength to create space displacement. To create space displacement and forcibly change space to another place, only an even more powerful existence could exist. A god was already beyond Lu Feng's imagination, and a god that surpassed ordinary gods was already indescribable. Finally, the entire space displacement was completed, and there was nothing left in the surroundings. Lu Feng could only look at his surroundings in a daze and horror. However, in the next moment, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in Lu Feng's eyes. It was intertwined with countless complicated lights. Because, he saw, "Who are you?" A figure had appeared 100 meters in front of him without him noticing. He just stood there quietly, surrounded by endless mysteries, full of the unknown and mystery. Lu Feng could not see his appearance, but he could vaguely feel that he was a person. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the figure did not answer, and did not even move. He just stood there quietly, as if waiting for something. Lu Feng stared at the figure closely, and after a moment, he revealed a thoughtful expression. Although the figure was wrapped in the infinite unknown, the aura exuding from his body was not that strong. Of course, this was not strong, but it was relative to gods. Although Lu Feng was only at the level of an advanced warrior, he had come into contact with too many strong people. His father was the God Slayer, a terrifying god, and the ancestors he had seen in the Lu family were all gods. In addition, Lu Feng had seen too much in Gufang's star. He had transformed into an invincible great demon, and had once used the power of his bloodline to fight against the phantom of the divine king of the underworld. Although it was only a phantom, it was a phantom that belonged to a god king. Even if it was just a projection of a trace of the divine king's power, no one could contend against him. Lu Feng, for some inexplicable reason, had actually fought against the phantom of the divine king. Moreover, this was not the most terrifying thing. In the interior of the giant Fudu, Lu Feng had seen a truly terrifying existence. It was the martial arts avatars of the three great projections, including the divine king of the underworld. They belonged to the three peerless divine kings, and they were the martial arts avatars of the greatest existence in human history. They had almost been projected into a physical entity, and their power was limitless. The three great martial arts avatars were constantly providing power, as if to help suppress the deep crack behind the ancient altar. Perhaps even a god might not have had such experiences and contact with them. Lu Feng, however, had. It was because of this that Lu Feng's vision was far beyond ordinary people, and even warriors were much worse than him. Although his strength was not enough, Lu Feng could easily feel the existence of the phantom opposite him. It was not very strong, and it might not even have the aura of a warrior. How is this possible? At first, Lu Feng thought that the phantom existence should be the creator of all this. He was the one who hid from the demigod existence, Li Tianlai, and transported Lu Feng here through time and space. At the very least, such an existence should be a god. However, the unknown figure opposite him was obviously not a god. Finally, just as Lu Feng was lost in thought, the figure moved. A punch was thrown at Lu Feng, carrying with it a monstrous aura, mixed with an indomitable will. They were charging over in a grand and mighty manner. Lu Feng's expression changed greatly. From this punch, he saw too much. This punch seemed to have refined countless essences, and the degree of power was stronger than that of a venerable warrior. This was obviously a fatal blow. Although he did not know the reason for all this and what was going on. However, Lu Feng also understood that if he could not dodge this punch, then what awaited him was only one outcome: death. Lu Feng forcefully mustered all his strength. Although it was hasty, Lu Feng didn't hesitate in the slightest as he countered with a punch. At this moment, the power of the bloodline was activated, and the essence of quality filled it. The power of the great demon's essence also faintly covered the fist. The supreme strike that Lu Feng had unleashed using zoned only was the most powerful strike Lu Feng had unleashed so far. It was even more powerful than the one he had unleashed against the venerable warrior with the help of the supreme technique. Lu Feng was confident that the strength of this punch was definitely not weaker than that of a venerable warrior. Although it was a hasty attack, Lu Feng believed that he should be able to resist it. However, at the moment of contact, Lu Feng realized that he was wrong, everything was wrong. His thinking was too simple. After the contact, the shadow did not move at all, but Lu Feng was sent flying 100 meters away. Blood spurted out of his mouth, and his arm seemed to be broken. His whole body felt fragmented. If it wasn't for his perfect physical body, and the invincible physical body after activating his bloodline, Lu Feng would have been smashed into a bloody mist by now. Struggling to stand up from 100 meters away, Lu Feng's face was full of disbelief. This is impossible. This is impossible. Because Lu Feng felt an even more violent destructive power from the shadow's punch just now. That was a destructive power that surpassed the quality. That was the existence of the realm. This is absolutely impossible. This is absolutely impossible. This was the second time Lu Feng cried out in horror. The blow just now had made Lu Feng understand everything. He finally knew the real realm of the shadow. He was a high-level warrior. A high-level warrior who was exactly the same as himself. However, in a collision of the same level, in a situation where the other party did not use any martial arts, he was able to almost blow Lu Feng up with one punch. This was hard for Lu Fenglai to accept. In a battle of the same level, in a situation where the other party did not use any martial arts, I could not even withstand a single blow. Finally, he stood up completely. His whole body was already flashing with a golden color. This was the precursor of the bloodline being activated to the limit. Lu Feng still activated the bloodline power of the human king. There was no longer any fear in his eyes. What appeared at this moment was madness and sharpness. Chapter 150. I, Lu Feng, have never been afraid of anyone in a battle of the same level. I don't care who you are. All of his power began to be drawn to the limit. Lu Feng finally went crazy. He had the great devil true body and the most powerful king's bloodline in history. He had comprehended substance in the realm of intermediate warrior. He had too many trump cards that surpassed others. Therefore, he wanted to be crowned king among those in the same level. He, Lu Feng, wanted to become the supreme king among those in the same level. At this moment, an inexplicable existence was challenging his king's glory and status. How could Lu Feng accept this? His blood boiled, his infinite power burned. In an instant, an ancient vision was reflected in the void. It was a terrifying emperor who roared in the heavens and crushed the earth. It was an infinite demon. The copper deity Great Devil had awakened. The most powerful blessing. This was Lu Feng's most extreme state so far. At this moment, his body had begun to tremble slightly. Countless bronze colors appeared on the surface of his body, vaguely carrying a kind of infinite golden essence. This was the power of Lu Feng's bloodline, the greatest supreme since ancient times, the power of the invincible king's bloodline. His strongest state had arrived. Standing at the pinnacle of his life, Lu Feng could already look down on any existence below the martial artist level. At this moment, Lu Feng had enough confidence to suppress even a monster-level advanced warrior because he was the greatest monster-level genius. He had already reached the peak and revealed his insanity. However, this didn't mean that Lu Feng had lost his reason. On the contrary, his heart had long been calm to a state of mind like still water. Insanity coexisted with calmness. Only in this way could he achieve the most extreme output and the craziest slaughter. Perhaps it couldn't compare to an absolutely crazy fighting power, but Lu Feng understood that this was the most suitable for him. This was the true strongest state. Looking at the figure in the distance, Lu Feng took a step forward lightly. One step covered a distance of several tens of meters. In merely 2 steps, Lu Feng had already arrived in front of the virtual figure. He punched out, carrying the true essence of the great devil, containing the concentration of his bloodline. This was an unparalleled punch, and it could be said to be domineering. However, in the face of such an attack, the shadow merely turned slightly and dodged it completely. A strange look flashed through Lu Feng's crazy eyes. He knew that this was the ingenious utilization of his realm. Compared to his essence, his realm was obviously more than a level stronger. In an instant, the phantom that flashed out threw out another powerful punch. Compared to the previous punch, this punch was even more powerful. Right now, Lu Feng was only in an enhanced state, but his comprehension still hadn't improved. Right now, he could only rely on his most powerful blessing to crush his opponent with a power that could crush everything. Therefore, in the face of this powerful attack, Lu Feng did not have the slightest possibility or space to dodge. This time, he only flew back 50 meters. His entire body was covered in blood, and he looked extremely miserable. But in the next moment, those heavily injured bodies began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was the terror of an extreme Dao bloodline. However, before Lu Feng could react, that phantom actually crossed the 50 meters and appeared beside Lu Feng. At the last moment, Lu Feng could only react slightly, and raised his arm to block that unparalleled attack. Pain, intense pain. Although he managed to block the attack, Lu Feng felt as if his right hand had been smashed into pieces. Countless parts of his hand had been broken, and it was as good as useless. Powerful, it was really too powerful. Everything happened in an instant, but it was in this instant that Lu Feng was almost crippled. Facing a phantom of the same realm, even in his strongest state, Lu Feng still did not have the slightest ability to fight back. He was on the verge of collapse. It appeared once again. The speed of that phantom was really frightening. The realm of movement had been used to the extreme. In Lu Feng's view, this was almost equivalent to a small space movement. Tyrannical, this was completely tyrannical. Even when Lu Feng faced the honorable martial artist, he was not in such a miserable state. Moreover, that was a warrior, and at that time Lu Feng was only an intermediate warrior. The warrior's realm was much higher than his, but even so, with his unlimited support, he was still able to fight back crazily. But at this moment, facing an opponent of the same realm, he did not even have the posture to fight back. Boundless humiliation caused Lu Feng's eyes to turn scarlet. A berserk aura suddenly erupted from him. In that instant, the great demon in the void seemed to have been stimulated by something. It actually let out the craziest roar it could muster. He had comprehended all 10 qualities, and the degree of his comprehension was also very profound. He could almost achieve a 4-fold increase in destructive effect. As for the realm, that was something that could only be achieved when one's destructive power was increased 10-fold. Lu Feng still had a long way to go before he reached the state, but that did not mean he was completely out of options. I have the most terrifying foundation, and no one can compare to me. Although the power I use is weaker than my opponent, it doesn't mean that I have no way at all. Opportunity, as long as I grasp the slightest opportunity, then the time for me to fight back will come. Lu Feng relied on being stronger than his opponent, so as long as he did not grasp the slightest opportunity, then the time for him to change everything would come. Finally, after enduring hundreds of terrifying attacks, after being ravaged countless times, Lu Feng finally grasped the trajectory of his opponent's movement for the first time. Now is the time. In his crazy and bloodthirsty eyes, there was a flash of light that made the light retreat. He gave up on any form of resistance and allowed the terrifying and violent attack to strike his body. But at the same time, Lu Feng's most powerful attack had already appeared. Supreme Technique, Soul Supremacy. This was Lu Feng's most powerful attack that concentrated all of his essence, energy, and spirit. The destructive power caused by the terrifying power was definitely above 10,000 stars. He was confident that even a real martial artist would be seriously injured or even die in the face of this attack. Flying a few hundred meters away again, Lu Feng suffered an unprecedented injury because he did not defend himself this time. But he smiled with a crazy and bloodthirsty smile. Because what he wanted, he achieved. Countless ripples appeared around the phantom's body. They were like stones thrown into the water, constantly swaying. But in Lu Feng's eyes, these were ripples of death. Because that shadow was hit by Lu Feng for the first time, hit by Lu Feng's powerful and terrifying attack. Flying backward, flying backward, flying backward infinitely. It was several times further than the distance Lu Feng had been sent flying. Vaguely, Lu Feng seemed to see the shadow gradually blurring and dissipating. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng knew that he had won. The body of a mere senior warrior would never be able to withstand his most powerful strike of annihilation. Finally, the shadow fell to the ground 400 meters away from Lu Feng, and did not move for a long time. Lu Feng was also seriously injured at the moment, unable to move. After waiting for a few minutes, the surging power of the bloodline began to appear, slowly healing Lu Feng's body. His body that had completely withstood the attack of the shadow finally recovered a little, and he was able to stand up. The madness in his eyes gradually extinguished. The current Lu Feng was extremely weak. Even the most casual attack could shatter him and make him sink into oblivion. Supreme Technique, Soul Supremacy, allowed me to temporarily increase my strength by 6 times, but the price is really too great. I'm afraid that even if I can get out of danger, it will take me a few days to recover. This time, who is it that wants to kill me? Up until now, Lu Feng had not offended many people. The only person he had a grudge against was Han Feng. However, Han Feng's father, the former peerless emperor of the Golden Generation, Han Emperor, had already died at the hands of Lu Feng's own father. The other members of the Han family did not have the guts to launch a sneak attack on him. Therefore, the possibility of it being the Han family was very small. Could it be that someone else knows about my background and is an enemy of the Lu family? This was the only possibility Lu Feng could think of. After all, to be enemies with the Lu family, it had to be an extremely terrifying force. Even among the superfamilies that had produced the Divine King, only 2 of them could contend with the Lu family for a short period of time. Therefore, if it was an assassin sent by one of those existences, then there was still a possibility. However, this was quickly overturned by Lu Feng. Using spatial displacement to deceive the demigod-level Tianlai was definitely the means of a god. However, if a god wanted to kill him, then he would have died long ago. Was there a need to use so many measures? Even to the point of letting such a genius fight to the death with him. Looking at the phantom in the distance, which had lost all signs of life, Lu Feng was infinitely silent. The phantom in front of him was definitely an evildoer who surpassed geniuses, and was even an extremely terrifying evildoer. It must be known that Lu Feng had so many inheritances, but he had yet to comprehend the existence of a realm. Of course, this was related to him having just advanced. However, the evildoer in front of him had already displayed at least 3 realms. Such an evildoer might not appear in the entire Federation for thousands of years, or even thousands of years. It must be known that even his father, the God-Slayer, had only comprehended the realm a long time after becoming an advanced warrior. Could it be that they used such a large amount of resources just to send such an evildoer to fight a life-and-death battle with me? This is impossible. In the end, in the next moment, Lu Feng's voice came to an abrupt halt. He looked into the distance, his eyes filled with disbelief. This was because the figure that he thought was already dead had actually stood up once again. The feeling of being crushed was no longer there, and all the previous injuries seemed to have completely disappeared in an instant. Everything returned to how it was before. At this time, the feeling that the phantom gave Lu Feng was no longer the same as before. Chapter 151. Powerful beyond any kind of power. Lu Feng couldn't feel any power fluctuations from the body of the phantom, but Lu Feng didn't think that it was because there was no power. After all, if there was no power, how could it be untainted by the destruction of the power of 10,000 stars? It could only be said that this kind of power had exceeded the limit that Lu Feng could feel. Lu Feng couldn't feel its level at all. Lu Feng stood in place with a complicated expression. He sighed deeply and said, "As expected, how can you be so weak when you're the one who arranged all of this?" Lu Feng still didn't understand why the existence who arranged all this only let a monstrous genius come here to fight with him. Was it just to train the younger generation? But with the eruption of his combat power, that blow was enough to threaten any high-level warrior. In the end, the Black Hand never appeared. At this moment, Lu Feng completely understood that the Black Hand was actually the phantom himself, walking quietly. All his power had been restrained. The phantom was still hidden in the endless haze, not revealing the slightest majesty. But it was this state that gave Lu Feng even more terrifying pressure. Facing such an opponent, he couldn't even resist. Finally, the phantom walked to a distance of 10 meters in front of Lu Feng. In the past, not to mention 10 meters, even a range of 20 or 30 meters was an area that Lu Feng could kill perfectly. But at this moment, he couldn't do anything. The aftereffects of using the supreme technique had been completely revealed, making Lu Feng unable to move at all. He watched helplessly as the phantom stood quietly 10 meters in front of him, unable to do anything. The next moment, an unimaginably terrifying majesty rose to the sky. This was a majesty that surpassed any extreme Tao. It was a terrifying will that Lu Feng had never imagined. At this moment, Lu Feng felt like a weak ant. He seemed to be standing under the starry sky, looking up at the vastness of the universe and feeling the changes of the heavenly Tao's reincarnation. This was a difference in quality, a difference that surpassed any difference in life. He wanted to breathe, but found that it was an extravagant wish. Although this wasn't an imposing pressure from the soul, it was a test of one's willpower. Lu Feng's face was deathly pale, and his body trembled. In the next moment, he looked like he was about to fall, but from beginning to end, Lu Feng did not fall. The majesty of the will? He had experienced 9 illusions. He had found his way in the endless unknown. His will had never been afraid of anything. Lu Feng was confident that even though he was weak, his willpower was stronger than anything else. No matter what he faced, he would not be afraid at all. Finally, the illusory figure seemed to have lost his patience. He slowly took a step forward. At this moment, a pressure that was far more powerful than before came crashing down on him. His entire body was on the verge of shattering. His bones creaked under the pressure of this terrifying power. This was a kind of torture. It was a painful torture. Lu Feng slowly lifted one foot. He stood there, unable to bear it any longer. He wanted to retreat. This wasn't what Lu Feng wanted, but an instinctive reaction of his body. This was because his body also knew that if he continued to persevere, he would be torn apart. In the haze, Lu Feng seemed to hear a voice. It quietly sounded in his ears, triggering a call from the depths of his heart. Retreat, retreat. Take a step back, take a step back? Retreat? Could he retreat? Could he retreat? Could he? No. How could he? His eyes shone with a light that had never been seen before. That bright and resplendent light seemed to be able to pierce through the chaos, illuminating the entire starry sky. How could I retreat? Lu Feng didn't retreat a single step. This was because he was a king among his peers. As a king, how could he retreat half a step? How could his glory allow him to retreat half a step? At this moment, this was a battle between Lu Feng and the Phantom. It was a battle that surpassed any martial technique or any power. This was a confrontation on the spiritual level, a confrontation of wills. Although I'm not your match in terms of strength, how could I be afraid of you? How could I let my glory be tarnished in the slightest? Lu Feng, I won't retreat. At this moment, Lu Feng went completely crazy. This was a kind of true and complete madness. He had lost all reason. There was no longer any calmness, no longer any thought to control his mind. In his eyes, there was only the path ahead. Any threat was no longer a threat. Even if his life could fall at any time, Lu Feng only saw the direction forward. One step, under this pressure that surpassed any will, Lu Feng actually took a step forward, one step. The Phantom took another step forward. The oppressive aura increased by countless levels once again. There were only 7 steps left between the two. However, these 7 steps were already Lu Feng's limit. His body began to disintegrate. Even in his most perfect state, Lu Feng could not withstand this pressure that far exceeded the limit of his will. He was really enough. His eyes were completely closed. Lu Feng forgot everything. He only felt that he had reached his limit, and there was nothing left for him to hold on any longer. Just when Lu Feng thought that he was about to sink into oblivion and completely perish, he felt it. An inexplicable power appeared and covered Lu Feng's entire body. At this moment, endless power flickered and constantly replenished Lu Feng's body. It allowed him to recover completely in an instant. How is this possible? When he opened his eyes again and felt the complete change in his body, Lu Feng was full of disbelief. He could feel that all the changes happened in an instant. However, it was in this instant that he completed a complete recovery. Even the aftereffects of using the supreme technique had completely disappeared. This was what Lu Feng found most unbelievable. The aftereffects of using the supreme technique were a double deficiency in the mind and body. Nothing could change that. However, at this moment, he had completely recovered. It was as if everything that had happened before was an illusion. This was really indescribable. Looking at the phantom in front of him, Lu Feng was full of a strange expression. Previously, it was this phantom that had forced him to the point of life and death. However, now, it was this phantom that had dragged him back from the brink of death. Everything was completed in this contradiction and confusion. Finally, Lu Feng let out a long breath and asked, "What is this for?" Lu Feng finally understood that this person did not want to kill him. After experiencing the scene just now, Lu Feng already understood that the existence in front of him was definitely an existence above the gods. It was not even an ordinary super-god. His strength had definitely reached an unbelievable level. If he wanted to kill him, he did not even need to move his hand. Just a thought was enough to make him fall 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Lu Feng knew that the powerful and mysterious power that had healed him just now was emitted by this phantom. If he wanted to kill him, why did he still want to save him? Silence, endless silence. Just when Lu Feng thought that it was really just a phantom, he finally opened his mouth. Everything that is blessed by the heavens, a willpower that far exceeds your own limits. The future path for you to walk to the pinnacle has already been constructed. However, you are still too weak. With the richest bloodline of the human monarch and so many mysterious powers, your combat strength should not be like this. The current you really disappoints me. Disappoints, Lu Feng's gaze focused slightly. Although Lu Feng had never thought that he was very strong, he was incomparably confident in his combat strength. After all, he had once killed a venerable warrior when he was only a mid-level warrior. And now, this phantom said that his combat strength should not be like this. He said that he had disappointed him. Seeing Lu Feng's slightly strange expression, the phantom seemed to have thought of what Lu Feng was thinking at that moment. He smiled gently, with a kind of endless emptiness that made it impossible to grasp what kind of voice it belonged to. However, it was this empty voice that invaded Lu Feng's mind from all angles, forcing him to listen. He had no choice but to listen. "Do you think what I said is wrong? Was it wrong?" In Lu Feng's heart, this was naturally a big mistake. He was proud of his current talent. Whether it was a psychic or a warrior, he was definitely unparalleled in this world. Even if he were to face the Holy Emperor, whom he had met before, Lu Feng did not think that he was much worse than him. The only thing that he lost to him was the difference in cultivation. If the two of them were at the same level, Lu Feng was confident that he would not lose to the Holy Emperor. Although Lu Feng did not answer, his expression said it all. Seeing this, the phantom chuckled. Lu Feng could not detect any sarcasm from this laughter, only a strong sense of tolerance. "Do you really think that you can do it? Based on your talent, is this really enough? You have the bloodline of the human king, and you are the strongest in this era. Once you become a virtual king level 9 or even level 8, you can fight supremes. However, is the current you really suitable for this kind of peerless talent? You should know that I've adjusted my cultivation to the same level as yours, and my physical body is only the most ordinary physical body. In fact, when I fought against you, I didn't even use my martial arts. Back then, the human king had only just stepped into the virtual king realm. He had not even reached level 5, but he could fight supremes. And you have the bloodline closest to him. Is this really enough? Moreover, compared to my previous state as a high-level warrior, I have not even displayed 30% of my peak." Chapter 152. This time, Lu Feng was really silent. 30%? Yes. His shadow didn't use any martial arts, and Lu Feng could also feel that the shadow's physical body in the battle just now was absolutely at an ordinary level. In such a state, It was really only 30% of a warrior's strength. But his strength was something that Lu Feng had to go all out to fight against. This 30% of my strength is enough for you to use supreme martial arts and risk your life to defeat me. What qualifications do you have to call yourself a peerless genius? Lu Feng was still silent, but this time, his complexion had become slightly unsightly. The Shadow's words weren't wrong. It could be said that every word struck at his heart, turning his little bit of pride into nothingness, and causing his confidence to suffer an unprecedented blow. The Shadow didn't say anything, only looking at Lu Feng's constantly changing complexion. Everything was still hidden in the endless unknown and hazy, without any expression. As if he had been waiting for a long time, Lu Feng's complexion kept changing, showing countless appearances. Finally, everything was fixed. Looking at Lu Feng, who only had one expression left, the Shadow didn't move, and his face still couldn't be seen. But for some reason, Lu Feng unexpectedly felt a kind of smile from the Shadow's body. It seemed to be a kind of happy and gratified expression. Lu Feng didn't care about this. At this moment, he looked at the Shadow with a solemn and resolute face and said slowly, but with unusual firmness, "You're right. The current me may not be able to fight against the current you, but it doesn't mean that I won't be able to in the future. It took me, Lu Feng, a little more than half a year to reach the level of a senior warrior. But in this half a year, I can already fight against 30% of your strength. Give me time, I believe that 40%, 50%, and even when you're at your peak, I can still fight against you. There will be a day when I will definitely be able to suppress everything. I, Lu Feng, have the most resolute willpower, and a talent that no one can compare with. My future is absolutely limitless. I have never retreated in the face of anything, because I firmly believe that I am the king, the ultimate king of all living beings. Even if there is endless suffering, even if there is the threat of death, I will not let my glory wither away. I, Lu Feng, have never feared anything. Therefore, I will eventually reach the peak, shatter the shackles, and surpass all existences." Lu Feng's voice grew louder and louder. At the last moment, it was filled with a kind of willpower. It was called pressing forward courageously. It was truly the strongest willpower that feared nothing. Silence. Endless silence. However, this silence was short-lived. In the next moment, a burst of laughter broke the silence. "Ha ha ha ha, good. Good. Alright. Lu Feng, you are very good. Very good. It was really good." When he saw Lu Feng's will surging to the heavens and sensed his indomitable will, he thought about how Lu Feng had not taken a single step back when he had faced his own will. In fact, he had even wanted to charge forward with extreme madness. Even with his status, it was difficult for him to suppress himself and say such words. Because Lu Feng's answer made him very satisfied. Pressing forward courageously, no matter how many thorns there are in front of you, you have never taken a single step back. In the eyes of others, this is called stupidity. However, in the eyes of true apex experts, this is great wisdom and great willpower. Hearing the virtual figure's praise, Lu Feng's originally excited expression gradually disappeared and was replaced by a slight shyness. Although there were many people who praised him, especially in the past 6 months, the number of people who praised him was uncountable. However, who was the person in front of him? That was such a powerful existence. How could his praise not make Lu Feng feel proud? In your Lu family, including King Juyan, only your father was worthy of my attention. Unfortunately, he still fell in the end and lost his last hope. Looking at all the monstrous geniuses born in the Federation in the past few hundred years, besides your father, there are only a few who can catch my eye. However, you are the one with the greatest hope of breaking that shackle. I hope that you won't disappoint me." Hearing this, Lu Feng fell silent. This matter concerned the existence of the Lu family, so he really couldn't say anything. However, from these words, Lu Feng was able to discern one thing, and that was that this phantom was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. In his eyes, the number one family in the Federation, the terrifying Lu family, which was strong enough to severely injure any apex Overlord race, actually didn't catch his eye except for King Juyan, whose father was unknown. In that case, just how high was this senior's strength? Looking at Lu Feng's pensive and shocked appearance, the virtual figure's voice didn't completely disappear. However, Lu Feng, who was immersed in his thoughts and shock, couldn't hear it anymore. He couldn't hear that voice, which was similar to a whisper. I hope that you can really break through. After all, I can't hold them off for too long. After an endless period of silence, Lu Feng, who had recovered, opened his mouth and asked again, Senior, can you tell me why you came here and brought me here? Was it just to take a look at me? This was Lu Feng's biggest doubt. Hearing Lu Feng's words, the virtual figure laughed again. However, this time, Lu Feng felt that it was full of a joke. You're saying that I descended here specifically to bring you here? Lu Feng was slightly taken aback. However, he still nodded slightly. Looking at Lu Feng's appearance, the virtual figure laughed again. However, this time, it gave Lu Feng a different feeling. It was a smile with a hint of a smile. Haven't you thought about why I came here? Lu Feng had thought about this before, but he still couldn't figure it out. This was also one of his biggest doubts. Looking at Lu Feng's conflicted appearance, the virtual figure spoke. The mysterious man slowly opened his mouth and said, Actually, I've always been here. You should be the one who has entered this place and entered my territory. At this moment, even though Lu Feng had thought a lot, he couldn't help but be dumbfounded. He opened his mouth but couldn't say anything in the end. After a long time, he finally recovered completely and stuttered, You're saying that this is your place? Could it be that you're a higher-up of the Federal University? This was the Technique Pavilion, one of the most important places in the Cymbidium branch of the Federal University. However, this virtual figure said that he was here. Therefore, Lu Feng could only think of this. However, after hearing this, the virtual figure shook his head again. After a long time, after a long sigh, he said, It's been a long time since I came here. I'm not a higher-up of the Federal University. As for my identity, you don't have to think about it. You don't have much contact with me, so you won't know. Lu Feng was silent and didn't say anything. As if he thought of something, he slowly said, Then, how should I address you? The virtual figure smiled and said calmly, You, from now on, call me, Slaughter the Heavens. The heavens are tyrannical, slaughter the earth. Is for, Slaughter the Heavens. After another space swap, Lu Feng returned to the campus. After experiencing the scene just now, Lu Feng didn't look depressed at all. Instead, he looked happy. Because in their last conversation, he had learned a lot of things from Tu Tianxian. When he left, he gave Lu Feng a shocking amount of wealth. That was, after Lu Feng returned from the capital administrative planet, he would personally guide Lu Feng in his martial arts cultivation. This was indeed a huge amount of wealth. It was an opportunity that Lu Feng wouldn't exchange for even billions of dollars. According to what Senior Tu Tian said, in addition to the imprint left by my father, there seems to be the imprint of the Grand Ancestor on my body. However, everything was easily deceived by Senior Tu Tian. Then, Senior Tu Tian's cultivation is definitely a terrifying almighty that can shake the entire galaxy. After all, the Grand Ancestor's cultivation seems to have entered an unfathomable realm, but he was still completely isolated by Senior Tu Tian. With the help of such a shocking almighty, my martial arts cultivation will definitely have unexpected gains. In the Lu family, Lu Feng could also have countless supergods to guide him. However, apart from the Book of the Human King, Lu Feng didn't want to have anything to do with the Lu family. Although his father killed a god and was unparalleled in the galaxy, making the geniuses of billions of races tremble with fear and admiration, he didn't have much success in educating his disciples. Relying on his father, Lu Feng, was more practical than relying on his own understanding. Now, Slaughter the Heavens was willing to guide him, which would definitely be of great help to Lu Feng's future progress. Thinking of the scene that might happen in the future, Lu Feng's lips curled into a perfect arc, and he quickly returned to the dormitory. It was already past 11 p.m., and he would be heading to the capital administrative planet tomorrow. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't plan to cultivate that night. If it had been in the past, Lu Feng would have had to spend the next few days in bed after using supreme techniques and going through such a huge battle. However, after Slaughter the Heavens waved his hand casually, he had completely recovered to his peak state in the past. Even the trace of fatigue from not resting for the past few days had completely disappeared, so Lu Feng didn't need to rest at all. Sitting on the bed, Lu Feng opened the Sky Network and entered the virtual world of the Sky Network. It was still early, so Lu Feng didn't plan to sleep. Although he had only interacted with Slaughter the Heavens for a few hours, Lu Feng had almost undergone a metamorphosis in these few hours. Chapter 153. In the last few hours, Tu Tianxian had said a lot to Lu Feng. Although these words couldn't change Lu Feng immediately, they had subtly changed Lu Feng. At the very least, he had gradually abandoned some of his previous thoughts. On the path of a martialist, if you want to reach the pinnacle, kill. Anyone who blocks my path to the pinnacle, kill. Anyone who blocks my path, kill. Anyone who breaks my mental shackles, kill. 3 kills. It's really bloody, but these words aren't wrong. The path of a martialist is to go against heaven and earth and change life and death. Even if you become a divine king, you still have to face endless calamities. However, what really blocks a martialist's path to the pinnacle is not a natural disaster, but a man-made disaster. Therefore, in the face of man-made disasters, the only way is to kill. Kill to stop the war, fight to kill, and kill to be king. This is the true path of a martialist. This was what Tu Tianxian had told Lu Feng before he left. These words had also taken root in Lu Feng's heart. Although he vaguely felt that these words were correct, Lu Feng didn't dare to really do so. After all, he wasn't like Tu Tianxian, who had the capital, mental state, and strength to kill everything. Lu Feng smiled bitterly and sighed softly. Kill. This word is very simple. Kill to cut off the source, kill to extinguish the fear, kill to break through the sky, kill to break the shackles. However, it's impossible to achieve such a realm without great power. Back then, when my father killed a god, he only started killing after he became a god. Didn't he have to endure before that? Lu Feng shook his head slightly and didn't enter the virtual world. Instead, he opened a Heavenly Network website. Looking at the strange image on it, Lu Feng immediately chose to register the information. Soon, all the input was completed. At the end, a strange input interface popped up. However, Lu Feng seemed to have already known about this. Without any hesitation, he entered a long series of numbers and words that were a mixture of 197 digits. At this moment, the image started to change. The first thing that appeared was a strange eye. It was enormous, almost as tall as several people. What was flickering in its eyes was a kind of heart-palpitating illusion, as if it could see through everything. Under the gaze of this eye, Lu Feng felt that all of his secrets were about to be exposed. At this moment, Lu Feng's expression changed drastically. He had a great opportunity and a great secret, but those were things that could never be said out loud. Whether it was the Tongtian Futu or the Primordial Sutra and the Great Devil True Body, they could not be known to anyone. Otherwise, just these two supreme arts that were comparable to the humanoid king's scripture would be enough to attract the greed of countless races. At that time, perhaps even the Lu family wouldn't be able to protect him. However, just as Lu Feng was at his most anxious, his eyes suddenly closed. The feeling of being seen through completely disappeared in an instant. At this time, Lu Feng finally let out a deep breath. The moment the huge pair of glasses closed, the scene changed completely. This time, a very formal interface appeared. This interface wasn't much different from the pages that Lu Feng usually browsed. However, if someone saw it, they would definitely be astonished, as the things that appeared on this page were things that had truly shocked the entire Federation and even the entire universe. This is something that ordinary people will never be able to come into contact with in their entire lives. If it weren't for my status as a member of the Lu family and my bloodline awakening, I'm afraid that I would have no fate with this place in my entire life. The page that Lu Feng had opened was the true core page of the Sky Network. Only the true higher-ups and powerhouses of the Federation could enter this place. What appeared on this page was true information about the human race. These things were things that ordinary people would never be able to come into contact with. Only those who were recognized would have the qualifications to enter this place. After binding my identity and confirming my identity as a human, I can enter this place whenever I want in the future. Lu Feng couldn't help but feel a little shocked when he saw the information on this page. The information on this page was all about powerhouses. Almost everything that had happened in the Federation and even in the entire universe could be seen there. Today, there was a piece of news at the top of this page. Lu Feng believed that this piece of news would be enough to shock the entire human Federation. The Tianshu Emperor, a peerless genius of the human race, has set foot in the Sky Emperor Galaxy and is battling the Fire Race's god, Huomeng. Without hesitation, Lu Feng clicked on the image. And at that moment, a video appeared. Lu Feng felt a little strange when he saw this scene. He hadn't expected that there would actually be a video of this battle. Recording a video was very simple. All he had to do was open the Sky Network. However, this video, which was from a first-person perspective, shocked Lu Feng. He knew that the Tianshu Emperor must have recorded this himself. To be able to have the time to record a video while fighting against a god, one could imagine how terrifying the Tianshu Emperor's strength was. Lu Feng didn't know much about the Tianshu Emperor. Therefore, before watching the video, he found some information about the Tianshu Emperor on the Sky Network's core site. The Tianshu Emperor was one of the 4 emperors of the previous generation. He belonged to the generation between the god-slaying Lu Tao and Lu Feng. He was very powerful. Even among the 4 emperors of the previous generation, he was ranked second among the terrifying emperors. According to the Federation, as long as one was over 35 years old, one was no longer considered a member of the younger generation. He was now over 40 years old. As the most powerful emperor of the previous generation, his talent was naturally unparalleled. He was almost invincible among the younger generation. Now, at the age of 40, although he still hadn't broken through to become a god, he had already reached the peak of the demigod realm. Coupled with his peerless talent, he could directly challenge a deity in the perfect stage, and he could even kill a deity. Lu Feng clicked on the introduction of God Huomeng. God Huomeng was a member of the Fire Tribe. The Fire Tribe was one of the top tribes in the universe, but it wasn't an Overlord tribe. Although it was extremely terrifying, there was still a certain gap between it and the human tribe. God Huomeng was an ordinary god of the Fire Tribe. However, although he was an ordinary god, he was considered a first-class genius among the gods. Power was very strong. Although he had just stepped into the realm of gods, he had already made a name for himself among the ordinary gods of the Fire Tribe. Lu Feng didn't know why the two of them were fighting, and he wasn't interested to know. What he cared about was the extent of the battle. He clicked on the play option, and soon the surrounding space began to change. Lu Feng knew that this was the unique first-person view of the heavenly network. Soon, the battle began. In the video, there was an endless and gorgeous battle scene. Terrifying power was rampant, and the horror of the final blow flashed one after another. Lu Feng saw the cracks of countless continents, the collapse of ancient pillars of heaven, the fall of technological cities, majestic ocean faults, and the fall of hundreds of millions of creatures. This was a battle that could be called the end of the world. At the last moment, the giant continent, which was comparable to a first-level life planet, was completely destroyed by the collision between the two of them, becoming the dust of the universe. The power of God really can't be blasphemed. Their strength has surpassed any description. After closing the video, Lu Feng's heart couldn't calm down for a long time. Although the Tianshu Emperor hadn't become a god, he had almost reached the peak of the demigod realm. In addition to his incredible talent, even when facing God Huameng, who was at the level of a god, he wasn't inferior. At the last moment, he even completely suppressed the god of the Fire Tribe. This is the power of the monsters of the Federation. Although the human race's starting point was weaker than many other races, because of the huge population, the number of geniuses and monsters born far exceeded that of other races. Those young supreme beings who could be titled as emperors were even more domineering, making the peerless geniuses of billions of races tremble in fear. After closing the video, Lu Feng couldn't calm down for a long time. In fact, the biggest impact of this battle was not the terrifying strength of the gods, nor was it the peerless power of the monsters of the human race. It was the destruction caused by the battle between them and their attitude of ignoring the fall of creatures. In the face of the death of almost 1 trillion creatures, the two of them didn't even have the slightest fluctuation. Their attitude could only prove one thing, which was that they didn't care about life. If it was the Tianshu Emperor, it would be easier to explain. After all, he wasn't a member of the Fire Tribe. Even if many creatures of the Fire Tribe died, it wasn't a big deal to him. However, Huameng was different. He was a creature of the Fire Tribe, and according to the introduction, the planet that the two of them fought and eventually collapsed was the origin of Huameng. It could be said that the creatures of the Fire Tribe on that life planet were the closest clansmen to Huameng. However, after all of those clansmen died, he didn't change at all. He was even one of the murderers. This made Lu Feng completely silent. Deities are beings that look down on all living beings. To them, only the pinnacle of cultivation is their eternal pursuit. For this pursuit, the lives of their clansmen can't move them at all. I don't know if in the future, I will also become an existence that ignores everything. Lu Feng didn't know if in the future, he would also give up everything in order to pursue the road to the peak. He couldn't say anything now, nor could he guarantee anything, because he didn't know what the future would be. With a deep sigh, Lu Feng began to read other news. There was a lot of news, some of which happened today and some of which happened not long ago. Lu Feng spent more than an hour to finally skim through it. Looking at the time displayed, he found that it was still very early. Lu Feng hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he began to search for information about the younger generation. Chapter 154. In an instant, countless personal information options appeared on the entire page. Seeing this, Lu Feng was slightly astonished. He had heard his father mention this before. In the past 500 years, his father's generation, which had killed gods, was considered the golden generation. Those who could become emperors were all exceptional geniuses who had the potential to become quasi-supreme. In any era, as long as it wasn't the era of the Divine King, such geniuses could become the #1 genius in the world. According to his father, his generation wasn't any weaker than the previous generation. The 7 emperors couldn't be compared to the young supreme of their generation. However, some geniuses hadn't been born yet. Those geniuses were said to be terrifying existences with bloodline shackles. Once they were awakened, they would definitely be terrifying existences at the level of extreme geniuses. Among the 7 emperors in the Federation, only the East Water Luo Emperor, the West Earth Rong Emperor, and the most mysterious Demon Emperor were at the level of geniuses. Therefore, according to Lu Tao, once their generation stopped hiding, It would be the most magnificent generation in the past 1,000 years. It would be a terrifying generation that could be called a golden era. Such a generation would definitely have the divine king. Therefore, this generation would definitely be a chaotic era, but it would also be a great era. It was also because of this that the number of geniuses and even geniuses in this generation would be far greater than any other era. Even so, Lu Feng didn't expect the number of geniuses in the Federation to be so high. I searched for geniuses in the Federation. Those who can be displayed should be geniuses at the Federation level. However, the number of geniuses that have appeared now is a little too much. They were densely packed and their numbers were too terrifying. Lu Feng saw that one page couldn't even display all of it. This was a little hard to believe. Lu Feng casually opened one and looked at it quietly. This was a genius named Qian Hua. He was a side descendant of the Qian family, a first-rate family in the Federation. His level of genius was that of a Federation genius. Although he wasn't a super genius, he wasn't the strongest genius either. However, just being a Federation-level genius was enough to intimidate everyone. Any one of the Federation's geniuses is enough to cause a commotion in a star system. But now there are so many such geniuses. A golden age, this is indeed a sign of a golden age. Gradually, Lu Feng's gaze focused on the life experiences of this genius called Qian Hua. This was a genius. Born in a side family, the resources he received were limited, but he had never stopped chasing after the peak. The current Qian Hua was only 27 years old, but he had already reached the realm of the Great Change. A martial artist in the upheaval period. What a terrifying existence that was! A martial artist in the upheaval period, even if placed on a first-grade life planet, would be an incomparably honorable noble. Of course, there wasn't much information about Qian Hua. After all, many geniuses had their own secret. What they put out in the open didn't matter. The real secrets were often hidden by them. After reading Qian Hua's information, Lu Feng casually opened the information of a few other people. These people were all geniuses of the Federation level. The strongest one was only a super genius of the Federation level. When Lu Feng wanted to see the information of the Federation level geniuses, he found that he couldn't open it. On the page, the words insufficient authority were clearly displayed. Insufficient authority. It seems that to view a lot of information, one needs to have authority. I just don't know how to increase my authority. This information was very important to Lu Fenglai. He didn't receive a huge amount of resources and information from a young age like other people, so his knowledge was limited. Compared to the children of those families, he was more than 15 years behind. If he didn't have these things, Lu Feng would be very passive at all times. Forget it, when I have time, I'll ask the principal and the others. They know much more than I do. Thinking of this, Lu Feng didn't dwell on it. Soon, he left the page. Until the next day, when he left, Lu Feng kept pacing back and forth in the heavenly network. He got up and organized his luggage. After hesitating for a while, Lu Feng still didn't bring the remaining elixirs with him. After all, these things were really too eye-catching. Soon, Lu Feng received Li Tianlai's notice to leave. Taking all the things that he had already organized, Lu Feng directly walked outside. Sitting in Li Tianlai's private car, the group headed straight to the center of the spaceship. As a demigod with a teacher like Dao Songtian, Li Tianlai definitely had a lot of resources, even though he was not the son of an aristocratic family. Although he didn't come from a noble family, Lu Feng believed that his net worth was definitely not low. However, at this moment, Li Tianlai was like an ordinary person, sitting in the most ordinary spaceship with Lu Feng. The distance between the capital administrative planet and the Cymbidium was a few super-galaxies, dozens of large galaxies, and hundreds of medium-sized galaxies. Even if they took the express spaceship, it would still take close to 20 days. Because they had to travel through the wormhole for 4/5 of the time, the heavenly network and other entertainment devices couldn't be used for a full 20 days. Therefore, this period of time was very boring. Lu Feng and Li Tianlai didn't have much in common, so during this boring time, Lu Feng chose to cultivate. Closing his eyes, he could instantly enter the god's plane. From an outsider's point of view, Lu Feng was just closing his eyes to rest. I've already completed the first level of the Origin Sutra, the Nurture God Realm. Now that I've reached the peak of the intermediate Psychic Master level, if I want to break through, I'll have to continue comprehending the second level, the Harmonious God Realm. Now I understand that regardless of whether it's the Nurture God Realm or the Harmonious God Realm, the God refers to the soul. The second level, the Harmonious God Realm, should be the fusion of the soul or something. I just don't know what it's talking about. The Origin Sutra only had the cultivation method for each level, but there was no related introduction. This made Lu Feng feel very conflicted. No matter what, I have to learn the Harmonious God Realm. Only when I enter the initial level of the Harmonious God Realm can I learn the supreme immortal techniques recorded in the Origin Sutra. Although they are only the lowest level of immortal techniques, their power should be incomparably terrifying. Lu Feng already knew that the origin of the entire universe was the legendary Immortal Devil era. In this era, any word with the word immortal was incomparably eye-catching. Immortal techniques probably had the ability to move mountains and fill seas, as well as the terrifying ability to change time. I just don't know how to fuse the soul. However, thinking about it, all of this should have a lot to do with the soul. As he thought about this, Lu Feng could only sit there and wait anxiously. He believed that although the records regarding the soul weren't easy to find on the heavenly network, it shouldn't be a big problem in the core area's station. However, he was currently shuttling through a wormhole, so the heavenly network couldn't be connected. Furthermore, Lu Feng was a little doubtful that he could really find these things with his authority. Realizing that it was very difficult to truly understand the definition of the Harmonious God Realm, Lu Feng had already given up. After all, as long as he could see Dao Songtian, he might be able to clearly answer his questions. Thus, continuing to think about it in seclusion was also a waste of time. After resting for a few hours, Lu Feng once again entered his inner world. Compared to before, this place had completely changed after his soul had manifested. Although it was still the boundless Milky Way sea of clouds, it was surging with an extremely powerful force. I really don't know what the use of this strange force is. However, since it was produced by the Divine Origin Sutra, it should be directly related to the future cultivation of the Origin Sutra. After thinking for a while, Lu Feng gave up. At this moment, Lu Feng's soul slowly sat cross-legged in the boundless sky above the Divine Origin galaxy. A strange change started to appear in his eyes. Unknowingly, the surging power above the illusory soul that was sitting cross-legged became even more intense. At the same time, the Divine Origin galaxy below him started to churn with huge waves. Finally, when the aura condensed to the extreme, the tranquil figure was filled with a turbulent aura. A moment later, Lu Feng moved. Countless techniques were unleashed by Lu Feng's soul. Among them, there was an indescribable profoundness that was being refined. The originally simple techniques were enveloped in a layer of indescribable uniqueness. This was the essence of a battle technique. After thousands upon thousands of battle technique essences were unleashed one by one, Lu Feng's movements suddenly changed. The essence of a few battle technique essences started to fuse. Gradually, the power that seemed to contain the essence of hundreds of battle techniques was completely refined into a single move. When this move was unleashed, it contained hundreds of variations and countless profoundness. There was actually a kind of intrinsic power flowing within it. This was the essence of a battle technique. It was the essence of a battle technique that was mixed with the essence of a battle technique. It was an incomparably powerful force. Any attack that was unleashed had the power of a few hundred stars within it. When the fist landed on the rolling waves, the terrifying waves that seemed capable of devouring an ancient continent actually stagnated for a brief moment due to the fist. In the real world, this attack was almost comparable to a powerful attack from a high-level warrior. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Feng unleashed more and more of the essence of a battle technique. When the final moment arrived, a kind of perfect will was unleashed. Powerful, incomparably powerful. At this moment, the true essence of a battle technique was completely unleashed. This was the true essence of a supreme battle technique. It was the true essence of a battle technique that had fused the essence of 10 perfect battle technique. All of the essence of a battle technique and all of the true essence disappeared. In the end, there were only 2 supreme powers left. These were the strongest powers that Lu Feng had condensed. They were the 2 true essences of a battle technique that existed in the high-grade technique Soul Sovereign. Chapter 155. After everything was simulated once, Lu Feng's movements slowly came to a stop. At that moment, his eyes, which had been filled with divine light, gradually returned to normal. After a long time, all of the aura dissipated and Lu Feng returned to his former tranquil state. Lu Feng heaved a long sigh of relief and looked at the endless calm of the divine plateau star ocean. He felt strangely serene. Now I have already condensed 2 types of ultimate martial skill true essences. If I want to advance to the highest level of a high-level cultivation technique, I still need 8 more. However, these 8 ultimate martial skill true essences are not that difficult to find. After all, these have yet to enter the realm of martial arts. What a star-grade cultivation technique required was a kind of extremely powerful power, which involved the realm of the Tao. The technique was close to the Tao. This was the foundation of a cultivation technique's transformation. However, it's still too early to think about this. If I want to break through and become a martialist, I need to cultivate the second level of the Great Demon True Body, the Great Golden Demon Body, to the Great Completion Realm. Right now, I'm only at the Small Completion Realm. I haven't even experienced extreme pain and tempering. My strength is only at the level of a high-level warrior who has just broken through. Without a few months of extreme tempering, I won't be able to reach the peak of this realm. Therefore, I don't need to think about dabbling in martial arts for the time being. I've already cultivated the Origin Sutra to the Great Completion Realm of the Nurturing Spirit Realm. My mind power has already reached 99 condensation and is only a step away from the second realm. Therefore, the most important thing now is to raise my level as a telekinesis master to a high-level telekinesis master. Looking at the calm surface of the sea, Lu Feng's calm body suddenly moved. He punched out without the slightest sign. However, this punch was extremely powerful. It had already surpassed the power of 100 stars. In this spiritual world, I can't use the power of my physical body at all. Therefore, as long as the power of my attack is not enhanced, it will only be at the level of a warrior. However, this punch of mine has already surpassed the power of 100 stars. In the outside world, this is simply impossible. If one's physical strength was 100 stars, without any enhancement or use of any cultivation technique, the power would only be 100 stars. This was an iron law, a forbidden domain that no one could shatter. If the substance is fused into it, perhaps the destructive power can be increased, but it will always be destructive power. It won't increase the power at all. This is an iron law that nothing can break. But why is it that in this space, I was able to unleash a strike that shattered the iron law? Lu Feng was puzzled. Just now when he was practicing his cultivation method, he had already felt a strange increase in his strength. At that time, he only thought that it was an illusion. However, that attack just now was a deliberate attempt. After that, Lu Feng finally discovered it. It turned out that everything really existed. After thinking for a long time, Lu Feng still couldn't find anything. Finally, he did not stay in the same place, and once again unleashed countless attacks. At this time, Lu Feng was no longer wholeheartedly studying his cultivation method. All of Lu Feng's attention was focused on the attacks he was making. Among them, there was the power that Lu Feng casually unleashed, as well as the powerful killing power that he unleashed using his cultivation method. In fact, Lu Feng was actually using the existence of the substance. Finally, when the last attack was unleashed, Lu Feng stopped once again. At this time, Lu Feng's eyes shone brightly like never before. So, it's like this. Lu Feng finally discovered a secret, a huge secret that belonged to him. Here, every time I use my cultivation method, the strange power produced by the divine planes will always appear in the divine planes star sea below. And this power will become a kind of mystery that unknowingly blends into every move of my cultivation method, causing my strength to actually increase slightly. Although the increase isn't very big, it really exists at all times. This is a kind of enhancement that is complete in essence. This is really an unexpected surprise, a heaven-shaking surprise. Lu Feng really didn't expect that there would be such a harvest. He never knew that the strange power actually had such an effect, allowing him to obtain an intrinsic enhancement. It should be known that generally, other than physical strength and cultivation methods, the only thing that could increase a martial artist's strength was the martial path incarnation that could only be obtained after becoming a martial artist. Perhaps before becoming a martial artist, the degree of enhancement was on top of the foundation, but once one became a martial artist, the degree of enhancement would be greatly reduced. At that time, although the enhancement of the martial path incarnation was added, the overall degree of enhancement would be greatly reduced. Before becoming a martial artist, although only the physical body and cultivation method were enhanced, the degree of enhancement was much greater. My physical body was enhanced to a terrifying 6 times, and once the soul supremacy evolved into an ultimate high-level cultivation method, the degree of enhancement would be 54 times. After becoming a martial artist and having the martial path incarnation, the degree of enhancement wasn't that high. The martial path incarnation increased by 4 times, the physical body increased by 6 times, and the cultivation method increased by 9 times, but the degree of enhancement was only 19 times. With the martial path incarnation, the degree of enhancement decreased by so much. Now, under the cover of the strange power produced by the divine planes, my strength can actually produce an intrinsic enhancement. This is really too terrifying. Although the degree of enhancement isn't that great, probably not even 0. 2 times, this is an intrinsic enhancement. An intrinsic enhancement was an enhancement based on the overall strength. Although the degree wasn't high, it couldn't withstand the massive base. 0. 2 times of the base complete enhancement. If the degree of enhancement is 19 times, then it's equivalent to 1. 2 times of 19 times. That is to say, according to my current level, as long as I become a martial artist in the evolution period and evolve the soul supremacy to the ultimate comet level cultivation method, then my degree of enhancement would reach 22. 8 times, which is 23 times of enhancement. After ordinary martial artists became martial artists, the enhancement of their cultivation method should be about 5 times. Due to the lack of resources, the martial path incarnation should be about 2 times. As for physical strength, it was at most 3 times. Therefore, after they became martial artists in the evolution period, the limit of enhancement was 10 times. As for those peerless geniuses, those terrifying experts with the bloodline of the descendants of God, even if they had the bloodline of the divine king, their physical strength was at most 5 times. because their cultivation method was not like Lu Feng's, which was completely condensed by himself. Their cultivation method's enhancement could not reach the limit of 9 times. At most, it could only reach 8 times. Perhaps because of the accumulation of countless resources, their martial path incarnation could reach 4 times the limit of an evolution period martial artist, but their final enhancement was only 17 times. Ordinary demonic geniuses of the descendants of God only have 17 times enhancement, but mine is 23 times, which is more than 7 times. A difference of 7 times. This is almost enough for me to fight those demonic geniuses across a large realm. Originally, because of the great devil true body and the first bloodline, in addition to his own special cultivation method, Lu Feng's maximum enhancement was 19 times. Such an extent was enough to make him almost invincible in the same realm. But now, with this unexpected surprise, he even had the capital to fight those demonic geniuses across a large realm. This was almost the realm of the legendary realm. Although this power only exists in my Xin Yuan now, once I become a telekinesis grandmaster, my mind power will be able to materialize, and this power should also be able to be drawn out of my body. Then, in reality, I will be able to achieve the same level. At this moment, Lu Feng was full of confidence. His comprehension ability was incomparably terrifying, and in addition to the existence of the Xin Yuan, Lu Feng was absolutely confident that among the younger generation, he was definitely the best choice. Now, in addition to all of this, his existence had reached a level where no one could compare to him. From the moment I set foot on the martial artist path, the supreme king of the younger generation will belong to me, Lu Feng. The journey of a few days was neither fast nor slow. Because these days, Lu Feng was immersed in studying the strange power in his body, so it was not considered boring. Finally, on this day, under the artificial voice of the advanced spacecraft, they arrived at the capital administrative planet. The capital administrative planet was the central city of the entire Federation. It was the first superlife planet discovered by humans after they set foot in the galaxy era, and it was also one of the largest life-sustaining planets discovered so far. At the beginning, there were no highly intelligent life forms on this life-sustaining planet. Those that existed were nothing more than some low-level intelligent life forms. After humans discovered this place, they immediately decided to set this as the capital of the entire Federation. The capital administrative planet was classified as a superlife planet, and the size of a superlife planet was almost comparable to a small star. Under normal circumstances, the gravitational force on such a huge life-sustaining planet would be extremely terrifying, but for some reason, the gravitational force on the capital administrative planet was almost the same as on Earth, the birthplace of humans. Therefore, there was no need for any gravitational modification equipment to survive here. This was also one of the reasons that prompted humans to set up their capital here. The population was over 10 trillion. Apart from humans, there were also other races living here. Even many hostile races of the human race could be found here. It could be said that on the capital administrative planet, one could find almost all the races that existed in the universe. According to legend, there were more than 50 godly powerhouses in the current era of the Federation. Among them, more than 30 godly powerhouses were guarding more than 30 superlife planet. Among the remaining dozen or so godly powerhouses, nearly 10 of them were guarding the capital administrative planet. Chapter 156. Of course, Lu Feng also understood that the 10 on the surface was simply a very small number. For example, on Gufang Planet, the Federation's divine powerhouse in charge of guarding Gufang Planet was titled Feng Yaoshan. However, the one who took action at that time was Gulan God, a young supreme emperor from Lu Tao's era. His strength was at the ultimate level of a true god. He had even found his own path, and was almost about to enter the path. With such strength, no matter what era it was, he could rule a region and become an extremely powerful overlord. Moreover, Gulen God's strength was definitely not something that an ordinary true god could fight against. Such a young genius emperor, even in the divine realm, could challenge opponents who were one level higher. Although Gufang Planet was important, it was still slightly inferior to the capital administrative planet. Actually, there's no need for many gods to guard it. As long as there's one person on the capital administrative planet, it'll be enough. His existence is enough to make all the gods retreat and live in peace. Lu Feng was talking about the person he was going to visit this time, the president of the Federal University of the capital administrative planet, Dao Songtian. Dao Songtian was an absolute legend in the Federation. Since he became the president of the Federal University 300 years ago, he had lived on the capital administrative planet for a long time and cultivated countless legendary geniuses and peerless geniuses for the human race. Of course, in the hearts of ordinary people, Dao Songtian was just a great scholar. His status was mostly due to the large number of students he had. His strength was not that outstanding. However, this was not the case in the circle of powerhouses. As a heavenly master who was close to the peak, he was only one step away from entering the realm of the virtual emperor. Such strength was unprecedented in the era when the divine king was hidden. It was enough to frighten millions of living beings and races. His existence alone was more terrifying than an entire inferior race. There was a lot of information about the capital administrative planet, but Lu Feng did not have much time to check it out. At this moment, Li Tianlai had already walked out of the cabin. Following closely behind Li Tianlai's footsteps, Lu Feng also walked down. Breathing in the free air, Lu Feng stretched himself. Looking at the countless towering buildings in front of him, Lu Feng took a deep breath. Although the capital administrative planet isn't the most prosperous life-bearing planet in the Federation, it can already be ranked in the top 3. Compared to this place, even Gufang's star paled in comparison. The Cymbidium, on the other hand, is equivalent to a remote mountain village. At this moment, Lu Feng finally understood why the descendants of the aristocratic families who came to the Cymbidium were so arrogant and superior. Indeed, their living environment may not be as good as the capital administrative planet, but it was not something a third-class life planet like the Cymbidium could compare to. Looking at the slightly shocked Lu Feng, Li Tianlai smiled and said, "Lu Feng, as you can see, the prosperity of the capital administrative planet is far from what the Cymbidium can compare to. The population here is more than 10,000 times that of the Cymbidium. Here, those who can be called prodigies are at least at the cosmic state level. In our federal university, such prodigies can be seen everywhere. There are also a lot of cosmic system state prodigies. For example, there are a lot of terrifying Federation-level prodigies in our federal university. It can be said that in the entire Federation, other than the prodigies of the aristocratic families, almost all the prodigies of the human Federation are gathered here. Only here is a heaven for prodigies." Hearing this, Lu Feng nodded his head gently. He knew that Li Tianlai still had something to say, which was that this place was not only a heaven for prodigies, but also a hell for prodigies, or perhaps they already contacted the Federal University. As soon as they walked out of the hall, there was a special hover car from the Federal University quietly parked on the side of the road. There wasn't a single hover car parked around the hover car. Lu Feng knew that according to the rules of the Spaceship Center, no hover cars were allowed to park around the hall. But the hover car from the Federal University wasn't stopped at all. It just openly parked there, and no one came out to criticize or stop them. From this scene, Lu Feng saw the power of the Federal University. Although the Federal University is only a school, it exists in the entire Federation and is the absolute pinnacle force. Even those intergalactic giant corporations can't compare to our Federal University in terms of political influence. Lu Feng nodded. The spaceship center they walked out of was one of the 18 largest spaceship centers in the entire capital planet. This was also one of the largest spaceship centers in the entire human federation. Every minute, every second, there were tens of thousands of spaceships landing here. Among the people who walked out, there were undoubtedly many with high status. But they could only walk back and forth in a low-key manner. They didn't dare to make any exaggerated movements, not to mention being able to park their hover car directly in front of the hall of the spaceship center, like the Federal University. Following in Li Tianlai's footsteps, Lu Feng also got into the luxurious hover car that was worth hundreds of millions. Soon, the hover car started and drove in the direction of the suburbs. Our Federal University headquarters is different from the branches on the first, second, and third-class life planet. They are built in the city center, in the most prosperous area. We, on the other hand, were built in the suburbs. Lu Feng, can you guess why? Lu Feng pondered for a moment and understood. He smiled and replied, I think it's because the Federal University headquarters is vast. Lu Feng had already investigated the Federal University before coming here. Compared to the branch schools on normal life planets, the size of the Federal University headquarters was undoubtedly terrifying. It covered an area of more than 100,000 square kilometers, almost 10 times larger than the central city of Honglan City. Even if the capital planet city was huge, it definitely couldn't accommodate such a colossus. Therefore, the Federal University headquarters could only be built in the suburbs. Hearing Lu Feng's answer, Li Tianlai didn't show any other expression. He also knew that with Lu Feng's intelligence, this kind of situation could be easily guessed. Then do you know why the Federal University headquarters occupies such a vast area? This was what Li Tianlai really wanted to ask. Lu Feng was silent as if he was thinking about something. He frowned slightly and thought for a long time. Even when the hover car slowed down, he still couldn't think of the reason. Looking at Lu Feng's expression, Li Tianlai gently waved his hand and said, Actually, it's normal that you can't think of it. We'll enter the campus in a while. I believe you'll understand when you see it. After that, Li Tianlai didn't say anything else. He just sat on the chair and closed his eyes slightly. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng didn't continue to ask. He just looked outside the window. After entering the Federal University, the hover car's speed had already slowed down. The surrounding scenery began to slide by slowly. Numerous huge battle stages stood quietly. Some of them had countless people gathered on them, shouting something, while others were still empty. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng's eyes were filled with shock. He finally understood. Although his eyes were closed, Li Tianlai seemed to have been observing Lu Feng. When Lu Feng's shocked expression disappeared, he suddenly opened his eyes. What existed in his eyes was the pride of first high school. Lu Feng, do you understand now? Lu Feng gently nodded his head. He took a deep breath and said, I understand now. I just didn't expect the Federal University to be like this. Li Tianlai looked at Lu Feng and said, Could it be that in your mind, a university should be about studying hard and standing aloof from worldly affairs? Lu Feng was silent. In his mind, a university should be like this. It should be peaceful and filled with a sense of peaceful competition. And in the Federal University of the Cymbidium, it was indeed what he imagined. But as the headquarters of the Federal University, it was completely different. At this moment, countless battles were constantly occurring. Those huge battle stages weren't used for viewing or to place any equipment. Its greatest use was to fight. Battles were happening all the time. Countless confrontations were happening all the time. This was what Lu Feng saw the most since he came in. Li Tianlai knew that Lu Feng still couldn't accept what he saw in front of him. He said in a deep voice, The Federal University is the oldest university in the Federation. It's also the highest educational institution that countless students dream of. There may be many people who can enter the Federal University, but only geniuses can enter the headquarters. Only geniuses who are at the peak of their respective fields can enter. In an ordinary branch, the ratio of normal students to psychic warriors is about 50:1. But in the headquarters of the Federal University, this ratio is 100:1. And these 100 are psychic warriors and psychic warriors. The headquarters is a world that truly belongs to martial artists and psychic warriors. Those who exist here are at least starry sky level geniuses, and geniuses will always be geniuses. If they want to become a powerful existence, if they want to overcome the countless restrictions in their lives and leave the abyss to become a dragon, then they need countless trials and tribulations. Battle, only battle is the best way to train. Although there won't be life and death in the university, countless battles are required here. Only then can these psychic warriors and psychic warriors have the capital to fight against others when they step out of the university. Only then can they quickly and better enter the role that they are used to. Lu Feng was silent. A strange light flashed in his eyes. He still remembered that mysterious slaughtering god in the Cymbidium said the word kill to him. Although it wasn't so extreme here, it was still filled with the true meaning of killing. No matter if it was killing or fighting, it was a form of training. It had the same effect through different means. Chapter 157. You might not be used to this place for a period of time, but after waiting for a period of time, you'll find that you'll be able to find a strong expert. This is the most suitable environment for the birth of a strong person. This is the most suitable place to nurture a strong person. Seeing Lu Feng's strange expression, Li Tianlai thought that Lu Feng was just not used to it. But he would never have thought that Lu Feng was like this, not because he was not used to it, but because he was looking forward to it. He, Lu Feng, looked forward to such an environment. He looked forward to such an environment filled with countless competitions and battles. In just half a year, he had experienced too much. During the trip to Gufang's star, he had witnessed too many miracles and sacred relics. He had seen the true top geniuses of the Federation. He had even fought against the incarnation of the Divine King. The battle at the Cymbidium had caused Lu Feng to slowly transform. He had the potential and spirit of a dragon. And Tu Tianxin's shout made Lu Feng even more determined in his heart. The current Federal University General Hospital was the soil for Lu Feng's complete transformation. This was the starting point for him to soar. It was the most suitable battlefield for Lu Feng to exist. The entire Federal University General Hospital was too big. In the campus, all kinds of hover cars flew past. Many of them were worth hundreds of millions. Just passing by, Lu Feng saw many of the Federation's top luxury cars. But after thinking about it for a while, Lu Feng understood. The Federal University General Hospital was not a place that ordinary people could enter. To enter, one had to be at least a starry sky level genius. And starry sky level geniuses could not be nurtured by ordinary families. They more or less had to have a powerful force behind them. And such a force's resources were also very terrifying. Of course, there were also those geniuses who showed their terrifying talent without any resources. But those were the minority. And once they showed their talents, there would be countless forces fighting to recruit them into their own forces. It was also because of this reason that every student who was able to enter the Federal University had at least one major power behind them. Therefore, to them, having a luxurious suspension car was nothing. After entering the school's main road, the hover car's speed began to increase. He instantly entered a state of extreme speed. Even so, it took them more than an hour to reach the center of the school. Stepping down from the hover car, Lu Feng took in a deep breath as he looked at the colossal object in front of him. He was filled with an indescribable feeling of shock. In front of him was an indescribably terrifying structure. Its height was more than 10 times larger than the 4 tallest buildings in the Cymbidium Central City. In terms of height and scale, It was at least 10 times that of the original. This was a skyscraper with at least 10,000 floors. Up until now, Lu Feng had never seen such a huge structure. Even the legendary number 1 building in the Federation couldn't compare to it. Although this terrifying colossal object couldn't compare to the sky-piercing Futu in his mental dimension, this kind of structure was still too shocking. Also, from this structure, Lu Feng felt a sense of horror. It was as if what existed in front of him wasn't some federal university building, but an endlessly terrifying prehistoric beast that was ready to devour everything. Lu Feng's shocked expression was completely seen by Li Tianlai. Seeing Lu Feng's expression, Li Tianlai smiled proudly. And this time, he didn't try to hide it at all. Looking at Lu Feng, Li Tianlai said, "Lu Feng, I think you should know about the structure in front of you." No? Lu Feng was a little puzzled. Regarding the Federal University building, the Heavenly Network only had a few words such as huge, majestic, and majestic. There wasn't even a picture. Otherwise, Lu Feng wouldn't have been so shocked after seeing it. How could Lu Feng understand it just by relying on those unclear descriptions? "Teacher, I've never heard of this building. And there doesn't seem to be much of an introduction on the Heavenly Network." Hearing Lu Feng's words, Li Tianlai shook his head lightly. He said, "If I say you know about it, then you should know about it. I think a lot of people know about it. There's no reason you don't know about it. Because its existence is definitely a legendary existence in the entire Federation." Seeing Li Tianlai's gradually serious expression, Lu Feng also instantly became serious. It was as if he had too much respect for that name. He said word by word, "Its name is Divine Brilliance." At this moment, Lu Feng trembled uncontrollably. A look of disbelief appeared in his eyes. He turned around and looked at the terrifying building that towered over the horizon. In that instant, a look of reverence overflowed from the corners of his eyes. His lips trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "Is this divine glory? Is this the legendary divine glory that fought for the human race for 300 years and created a prosperous era?" Li Tianlai's eyes were also filled with a look of reverence. He nodded lightly. Slowly but strangely, he said in a deep voice, "Yes, this is the legendary divine glory of the human race. During the 300 years of chaos, during the era when the Divine King was in hiding, it protected the human race." Divine glory was an extremely dazzling name. It had suppressed the destiny of the human race for 300 years, creating an eternal cornerstone for the human race's future prosperity. It was also because of it that the name of the human race's psychic master spread throughout the entire universe, causing billions of races to acknowledge the greatness of the psychic master and the supremacy of the psychic master. The owner of the divine glory was one of the greatest prophets of the human race's psychic masters. He was an absolute powerhouse among the void thearchs and the creator of many miracles in the endless legends. Li Tianlai's voice drifted slowly. Lu Feng's mind was already drifting along with his voice. It was as if he had passed through the long river of time and space and seen the prosperous era of the human race's psychic masters. The 3 greatest void thearchs of the human race since ancient times were the most famous among the psychic masters. He was the Supreme Emperor Heaven. His strength alone shook the 9 heavens and galaxies. He battled the Divine King alone and reclaimed the name of psychic masters. This was the first time psychic masters had entered the ranks of the pinnacle powerhouses. Although he was a void thearch, in the hearts of many humans, the Supreme Emperor Heaven was also known as the Supreme Emperor Heaven thearch. After the Heavenly Emperor Heaven thearch, the peerless void thearch of the human race, Su Mi Tian, wasn't any weaker. He was one of the ancient overlords of the entire universe. Although he had never battled the Divine King, his name was passed down through the ages. In the long river of psychic masters, he was one of the highest peak. It was because of Sumi Tian's existence that psychic masters became the most honorable profession for refining elixirs. It was also because of this that psychic masters of the human race became one of the most honorable professions in the entire universe. Therefore, Sumi Tian was also known as the Sumi Celestial Darch by later generations. At this point, Li Tianlai fell silent. These things weren't secrets. Any psychic master or anyone who wanted to become a psychic master would know about them. Supreme Emperor Heaven Darch, Sumi Celestial Dart. Two of the three peerless void thearchs of the human race were the supreme beings of the universe who could battle the Divine King. However, compared to the last celestial Darch, the two of them might be able to suppress or be on par with each other in terms of reputation among psychic masters. However, in the circle of ordinary people, they couldn't be compared at all. He was the creator of divine brilliance. Even an ordinary person would be able to say his name and remember his existence deeply at all times. Compared to the previous two celestial thearchs, the life of the creator of Shen Huang was filled with endless hardships. It could even be said that it was full of thorns. He didn't enjoy the glory of being a void Darch in peace. Instead, he chose a path paved with blood for the human race. His title was Shen Huang Celestial Darch. Shen Huang Celestial Darch, along with Sumi Celestial Darch and Supreme Emperor Heaven Darch, are the three peerless void thearchs of the human race. However, the names of the latter two celestial thearchs are only known by ordinary people. In the mouths of powerful people, they are only known as Supreme Emperor Heaven and Sumi Tian. Only Shen Huang Celestial Darch is the true celestial Darch in the hearts of many living beings. Even the celestial masters of today have to respectfully address him as Shen Huang Celestial Darch when they mention his existence. Shen Huang Celestial Darch, no one could suppress him and nothing could bully him. From the day he broke through the obstacles and shattered the shackles to become a void Darch, he went on endless expeditions. At that time, the human race was in a desperate predicament. Many races were restless. Even the human race's ally, the pinnacle Overlord race, the war god race, had the greed to annihilate the human race. And in such a desperate situation, Shen Huang Celestial Darch broke through the obstacles and became a void Darch, waging war on the world. Shen Huang Celestial Thearch's life was spent in killing. His strength was unimaginable. He deserved to be called the number one powerful person in the realm of Psyche Masters, the number one Psyche Master. There were no less than 7 Divine King experts who clashed with him. Almost all of the Divine King experts in the current universe, he fought against all of them. 300 years, a whole 300 years. Shen Huang Celestial Darch became a void Darch. His lifespan was comparable to the Divine King. He wouldn't wither for 10,000 years, he wouldn't age for 10,000 years, he wouldn't die for 10,000 years. Almost, he could live for 40,000 years. But his real lifespan was only 371 years. Every time he fought with the Divine King, he used his life force to fight. In just 7 battles, he used up 40,000 years of his life force. In the last battle, he even burned his eternal unyielding will and raised his life force to the extreme. He displayed the strongest power of a Psyche Master, the supreme spell of the unparalleled Dharma. He perished together with the supreme blood king of the universe of the pinnacle race, the serene blood clan. The supreme spell of the unparalleled Dharma is the strongest Psyche Master technique that surpasses the supreme spell. In the universe, there are only 2 forms of the supreme spell of the unparalleled Dharma. Shen Huang Celestial Darch displayed one of them, the twilight of the gods. In the end, this peerless void Darch, who no one could suppress and bully in his entire life, died. 10 years after his death, the peerless genius of the human race, the Divine King of the Twilight, appeared out of nowhere and helped the human race stabilize the situation. Using the legacy of Shen Huang's celestial arch, he started the human race's revival and prosperity. As for the Twilight Deity King, it was to commemorate this Supreme Void Emperor's final and resplendent strike that he gave himself this title. Chapter 158. Although Lu Feng was already very familiar with these things, he was still very familiar with them. However, when Li Tianlai spoke again, Lu Feng's blood still surged. Lu Feng, the divine blaze in front of you was left behind by the divine blaze celestial emperor. Although a Psyche Master is unable to manifest a martial Dao avatar, he can materialize his mind power after becoming a Psyche Master. The Divine Blaze was the ultimate weapon that the Divine Blaze Celestial Emperor used his entire life to condense. It was also the glory of the human race that followed him to conquer billions of galaxies and was stained with the blood of the Divine King. Although the origin soul it gave birth to was shattered by the Blood King in the final battle, as the witness of the Divine Blaze Celestial Emperor's life, its existence is the source of the human race's faith and a great sacred object. In the end, it was placed here by the Divine King to continue protecting the next generation of the human race. At that moment, when Lu Feng looked at this massive object, he no longer felt as fearful as before. He finally understood why this massive object gave him the feeling of a peerless, ferocious beast. It was because it was a peerless weapon. It was a peerless, ferocious flame that was stained with the blood of the gods and even the supreme beings of the 7 universes. Perhaps only the Federal University, where countless geniuses had gathered in human history, could intimidate this terrifying flame and prevent this peerless, ferocious object from harming the human race and tarnishing the great glory of the Divine Blaze Celestial Emperor. If its origin soul had not been shattered in the final battle and prevented it from growing, its existence would have been comparable to or even surpassed the martial Dao avatars of the Divine King. What a pity for the peerless celestial emperor of a generation, what a pity for the peerless sacred object that had stained countless divine kings. After being stained with the blood of the Divine King, even the most ordinary iron would transform into a terrifying object that could kill gods. As for the Divine Blaze, although it was only condensed by a celestial emperor at the Void Emperor level, in many ways, it was even more terrifying than some of the martial Dao avatars condensed by the Divine King. Alright, come with me to the principal. He has been waiting for you for a long time. Upon hearing this, Lu Feng nodded slightly but did not say anything, because at this moment, his heart was also very nervous. Dao Songtian was just a taboo name in the past, even though his strength and legend were shocking. However, those were just written records. It was just a vague feeling. Now that he was about to meet this universe overlord, Lu Feng could not help but feel nervous. Following closely behind Li Tianlai, the two of them headed towards Shen Huang, where there was a 3,000-story tall building. It was the holidays now. It was the same in the general hospital. Not only did many students leave, but many teachers also left. There were not many pedestrians in the campus. Coupled with the vastness of the campus, it felt even more rare. Even in the main teaching building, there were not many people. Following Li Tianlai, the two went straight into the teaching building. At this time, they bumped into a few people walking in pairs. Seeing them, Li Tianlai quickened his pace slightly. Lu Feng could clearly see the slight smile hidden in his eyes. Lu Feng knew that these people must be people that Li Tianlai was familiar with. Otherwise, he would not have such an expression. Finally, the group seemed to have seen Li Tianlai as well. Their footsteps paused slightly. Then, like Li Tianlai, they walked over quickly. Soon, Li Tianlai arrived in front of the group of people. At this time, just when Lu Feng thought that they were going to talk about old times, a middle-aged person in the group suddenly threw a punch at Li Tianlai. Although this punch did not use any technique, there was no need to doubt its strength. From it, Lu Feng felt a strong destructive force that surpassed the realm. It did not trigger any strange phenomena in the space, but in front of this punch, Lu Feng felt a sense of impending death. His eyes widened slightly. Lu Feng subconsciously wanted to use his strongest support to resist. Although he knew that he would not be able to resist such a blow even at his peak, this instinctive reaction made Lu Feng ready for everything. However, at this moment Li Tianlai moved. There was no extravagant movement, no strong support. He just waved his arm slightly in the face of the incoming punch. In an instant, a sparkling and translucent curtain wall suddenly appeared in front of Li Tianlai. Lu Feng knew that it was a spiritual materialization. It was a spiritual curtain wall condensed by Li Tianlai, who was at the peak of the King's psychic master realm. There was no doubt that the powerful blow collided with the sparkling and translucent curtain wall. At this moment, Lu Feng felt the entire void tremble slightly. However, it was only a slight tremble, and there wasn't any earth-shattering phenomenon. The fist disappeared, the curtain wall shattered into nothingness, and everything returned to calm. However, at this moment Lu Feng took a deep breath. The punch just now was definitely an extremely terrifying and powerful blow. It was many times more powerful than the strongest attack he condensed when facing Tu Tianxun, who was at the advanced warrior level in his peak state. At that time, the destructive power of his attack had definitely reached or even exceeded the standard of 10,000 stars. However, in front of this punch, he felt so powerless. Then, how powerful was that punch just now? 50,000 stars? 60,000 stars? Or even 100,000 stars? In addition to the destructive support that faintly surpassed the realm, the destructive power had probably far exceeded the standard of 100,000 stars. This was too terrifying. Everything calmed down. Li Tianlai and the middle-aged man who had punched looked at each other. After a long time, the two of them actually laughed at the same time. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng knew that there should be no hatred between the two of them. Just now it was just a kind of exchange of pointers. Sure enough, Li Tianlai said, Wang Qingfeng, your strength hasn't improved at all in the past 6 months. I remember that your punch back then was able to shatter my spiritual shield. How come you can't even shake it now? Hearing Li Tianlai's words, Wang Qingfeng shrugged gently and said in an extremely relaxed tone, How can I compare with you? I'm only at the advanced perfect stage now. How many years have you entered the demigod level? Looking at you, I'm afraid you're almost at the mythical level now. Li Tianlai smiled slightly but didn't deny anything. On the other hand, everyone else revealed a slightly strange expression. Finally, another figure walked out from the middle-aged man's side. Compared to Wang Qingfeng, this figure was obviously much weaker. From him, Lu Feng felt a sense of spirit as vast as the sea. He looked at Li Tianlai, sighed slightly, and said, The demigod level has 4 domains. I didn't expect you to have already reached the second realm. Heavens, in our generation, your talent wasn't the strongest, but who would have thought that your improvement would be the fastest? No wonder the principal accepted you as a disciple. The word principal made Li Tianlai's previous joking temperament disappear instantly and was replaced by a solemn feeling. He said, I can make such progress all thanks to the principal's guidance. If it weren't for him, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to catch up to my seniors. It turned out that these people in front of him were Li Tianlai's seniors. Lu Feng understood that these people should be students of Li Tianlai's generation. They belonged to the Federal University's generation before Lu Tao's generation, the generation of Emperor Tianqu's generation. Lu Tao's explanation didn't make these people admit it. They just shook their heads lightly and didn't say anything. Finally, one of them seemed to see Lu Feng beside Li Tianlai. His eyes sparkled as he asked Li Tianlai, Heavens, this kid is your disciple, right? Did you bring him here to broaden his horizons during the holidays? Li Tianlai did not have the time to speak when another person beside him spoke up. Tianlai, this disciple of yours is not bad. He should be an intermediate pinnacle psychic now. I'm afraid it won't be long before he breaks through and becomes an advanced psychic. If he becomes an advanced psychic, he'll be qualified to enter our headquarters through special recruitment. In the Cymbidium, as long as one had psychic qualifications, they could enter the Federal University's Cymbidium branch through special recruitment. However, in the headquarters, only by becoming an advanced psychic could one pass the assessment and enter the headquarters as an ordinary special recruit. One only had the talent to become a beginner psychic, while the other had the lowest requirement to become an advanced psychic. The difference between the headquarters and the branch was obvious at a glance. Li Tianlai didn't show any signs of irritation as he looked at the seniors and juniors around him. He just looked at these people slyly. Finally, when everyone looked at him, Li Tianlai said slowly, "His name is Lu Feng. He's a student of our Cymbidium branch." Hearing this, everyone gently nodded their heads. However, Li Tianlai's next sentence surprised them slightly. "However, Lu Feng isn't my student. I don't have the qualifications to accept him as a student." Those people frowned slightly. In the end, it was Li Tianlai's closest friend, Li Qingfeng, who asked, "He's not your student? You're almost a demigod, and your soul is about to become a god. You don't have the qualifications? Could it be that he has some great background?" Other than this, no one could think of anything else. After all, Li Tianlai, who was almost a demigod, was a big shot in the entire capital administrative planet. However, he said that he didn't have the qualifications. This was really confusing. Seeing that these people didn't care about him at all and directly talked about him here, Lu Feng might have felt a little angry in the past. After all, no one would be happy to be pointed and talked about like this. However, Lu Feng didn't feel that way at this moment. This was because he knew that this was the privilege of the strong. In their eyes, there was only the realm of the strong. Everything else was nothing at all. Even the Federation's laws weren't binding them. Chapter 159. Seeing his fellow apprentices frowning slightly, Li Tianlai's smile became more and more obvious. He pondered for a moment before saying, "Actually, I came back this time to bring him to meet someone, and that person is the one who wants to accept him as a disciple." At this moment, many people's interest was piqued, and they all looked at Lu Feng and Li Tianlai. Li Tianlai also knew that it was time to say it. He opened his mouth and said, "Lu Feng is now my student, but it won't be long before he becomes my junior brother, my youngest junior brother." After saying this, Li Tianlai didn't look at his fellow apprentices. After giving Lu Feng a look, he walked directly toward the stairway in the center of the hall. Lu Feng didn't hesitate and followed closely behind Li Tianlai. Everyone was a little stunned, and it took a long time for someone to react. He looked at the backs of Lu Feng and Li Tianlai as they left, and took a deep breath. There was a look of shock in his eyes. God, that person called Lu Feng is going to be his youngest junior? Could it be that the person who wants to accept him as a disciple is the principal? Although they didn't want to admit it, everyone already understood that this was indeed true. At this moment, someone let out a long sigh and said, "This time, we really made a mistake. I didn't expect that he was actually someone that the principal thought highly of and wanted to personally accept as a disciple. How terrifying of a talent does he need to have?" Li Tianlai's talent development quotient was 1.8, and he was a super genius at the Federation level. However, the reason he was accepted as a disciple by Dao Songtian was not only because of his talent development quotient, but also because of Li Tianlai's opportunity. However, that young man had been accepted as a disciple by Dao Songtian. This meant that his talent definitely surpassed Li Tianlai's. The principal's temperament and character are there for all to see. Although he appears to be peaceful, he is extremely stubborn. I'm afraid that even the direct descendants of the divine King clan would be unable to become teacher's disciple as long as their aptitude isn't sufficient. After all, with teacher's strength and status, he doesn't care about those superfamilies at all. Therefore, this young man must have an extremely terrifying aptitude. If that's the case, I'm afraid his aptitude is at the level of a super genius in the Federation. There were countless geniuses in the younger generation. It could even be said that there was an explosion of geniuses. However, most of the geniuses were concentrated in the various big families. Even those geniuses who didn't enter the aristocratic families didn't all enter the Federal University. Therefore, in this generation of the Federal University, there was only one person who could become a peerless genius at the level of the Federation. Because of this, the government university and the capital university were eyeing the upcoming student competition. They vowed to replace the Federal University and become the #1 university. Now that Lu Feng had appeared, there was no doubt that everyone was injected with a shot of cardiac stimulant. After all, his future teacher was the principal. There were many types of stairways to heaven. A good stairway to heaven could be 10 times faster than an ordinary stairway to heaven. Although the speed increased, there wouldn't be any difference in the feeling. Such stairways to heaven would only appear in those iconic buildings. There was no doubt that the stairway to heaven under Lu Feng's feet was such a top-notch stairway to heaven. The speed was nearly 20 times faster than the stairway to heaven in the Cymbidium branch, but there wasn't the slightest bit of difference. This was what Lu Feng felt from an ordinary person's point of view. Every floor of a 3,000-story building was more than 10 meters tall. The 3,000-story building was 30,000 meters tall. Such a terrifying height could only be found on the capital administrative planet. On the Cymbidium, Lu Feng took a full 10 minutes to reach the top floor. However, here, because of the stairway to heaven, although the height was increased by 3 times, he only took less than 2 minutes to reach the top. As his field of vision expanded infinitely, Lu Feng knew that he had reached the top floor. Walking out of the stairway to heaven, he saw that the surrounding decorations were not luxurious at all. However, in Lu Feng's opinion, everything was luxurious. An ancient and dignified will lingered for a long time, hovering in the hall on the top floor. Looking at the things around him that were either ancient or full of technological aura, Lu Feng was slightly confused. This was because he found that these things were all constructed with a special material. When he saw Lu Feng's gaze, Li Tianlai said, "Actually, there is nothing here. What you see is not made of any material produced in the universe. They are all materialized by the teacher's consciousness." Lu Feng's gaze focused slightly, and his eyes flickered countless times. When he looked at the objects around him again, he was slightly shocked. Teacher is recognized as the #1 psychic in the Federation today. Permanent spiritual materialization is something only gods can do. However, they can only materialize a very small part of it, and the image will be modeled and not as exquisite as it is now. After all, materialization of consciousness means that it is creating. Teacher is the only one in the entire Federation who can do this to such an extent. At this point, Li Tianlai's eyes were filled with pride. Lu Feng only nodded continuously, and his eyes were unusually bright. At this moment, Lu Feng understood that becoming Dao Songtian's disciple was definitely one of the greatest opportunities in his life. "Alright. Teacher already knows that we have arrived. Now, follow me to meet teacher." After saying this, Li Tianlai walked towards an ancient altar-like place in the middle of the hall. It was only then that Lu Feng realized that there was indeed an altar-like formation pattern in the hall. The lines of these patterns were extremely complicated, and there was an indescribable fluctuation in them. Lu Feng felt that the complexity and strength of this altar was almost on par with some of the patterns he saw in Gufang's star. Standing in front of the formation, Lu Feng could not see anything inside. In his senses, it was as if there was something there that did not exist. The two of them did not wait. When they arrived in front of the formation pattern, a gap suddenly appeared in the confused and unknown formation pattern. Seeing this, Li Tianlai did not hesitate at all and directly stepped into it. Lu Feng hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he followed closely behind Li Tianlai and walked in. In an instant, heaven and earth changed, and time rotated. Everything changed completely. This place was no longer the top floor of the main teaching building of the Federal University's General Hospital. Instead, they had entered another world. It was a vast world filled with tranquility and peace. There were countless living creatures, mountains, rivers, and seas. This was a tranquil land, a peaceful place filled with life. The scenery was so beautiful that it made people forget to leave. It could be said that this place was almost equivalent to a paradise on earth. Vaguely, Lu Feng saw weak living creatures running on the ground. They were so weak that it seemed like they could be completely crushed with a light blow. He saw those huge creatures with terrifying power. They could overturn mountains and seas in an instant and completely wipe out billions of living creatures. He saw the ancient living creatures in the sky. Those were peerless, ferocious birds that only existed in remote star regions. He saw the legendary immortal beasts that had appeared in ancient times. This was a world where the strong and the weak, terror and peace coexisted. This place should have been filled with countless killings, but Lu Feng did not see any collisions or chaos. There was only a kind of tranquility and a strange kind of harmony. Gradually, Lu Feng became a little dazed. Seeing Lu Feng's appearance, Li Tianlai wanted to wake him up. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly sounded. Is it because seeing the world here made you feel that your understanding has been overturned? The voice was strangely gentle, like a cool breeze that cleansed one's heart. It made people unconsciously let go of everything. Lu Feng slowly woke up from that strange silence. He sighed softly and said indifferently, perhaps, I don't know if this world is real or illusory. Or maybe it's just a figment of our imagination. After all, this has overturned my understanding. I don't know if this can really exist. The voice sounded again. It was just as gentle, but there was a hint of regret in it. This is real. It definitely exists. It's just that it exists in my world. In my world, I created everything. I condensed the laws and principles. When I said there must be light, there will be light here. When I said there must be life, all things will come to life. When I said there must be peace and tranquility, all disputes will retreat and peace will descend. All of this, do you understand? Lu Feng was silent. Endless silence. For a long time, there was no reply or movement. The owner of that voice didn't speak again. It made Lu Feng wake up from his silence. At this moment, between heaven and earth, there was silence. Those flying beasts and weak spirits had all disappeared. All that was left was the vast wilderness. Heaven and earth were silent. Li Tianlai looked at Lu Feng. He was slightly at a loss. He didn't know what was going on. He also didn't understand what Dao Songtian was talking about. What did he want Lu Feng to understand? After a long time, at that moment, after an unknown amount of time, a burst of laughter sounded. It cut through the silence of heaven and earth, shattering the peace and tranquility. Ha 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 ha. The laughter was loud and clear. The person who had laughed was Lu Feng. At this moment, his body was full of strange fluctuations. It was an indescribable emotion. It was a picture of madness, arrogance, and deportment. However, when he saw Lu Feng like this, Li Tianlai didn't mock him. Therefore, the feeling that Lu Feng gave him at this moment was unimaginable. It was an indescribable feeling of transcendence. Although Lu Feng's strength was so weak in Li Tianlai's eyes that he could kill him countless times just by gently raising his arm, the transcendental will on Lu Feng was something that he couldn't see or touch. Chapter 160. Mental state, it's actually. Transcendence, what a terrifying word. Since ancient times, there had been countless experts who had diligently pursued and never stopped. One of their ultimate goals was to transcend. Although this transcendence was only a change in the state of mind, to many experts, such a state of mind was something they yearned for even in their dreams. Legend has it that only ancient virtuous paragons and current extreme Tao powerhouses possess a transcendent mental state. Those existences have seen through the world of mortals. Their minds are sacred and they are the most powerful existences of all eternity. How can he achieve such a degree of transcendence? Li Tianlai found it unbelievable. He couldn't imagine how Lu Feng could achieve this. The ancient virtuous paragons of the past and the current great existences had all experienced the vicissitudes of countless eras. They had all gone through the trials of life and death to reach this step. However, how could Lu Feng, a young man who had lived for no more than 17 years, achieve this? The laughter gradually stopped. Lu Feng looked at the strangely tranquil world with an indescribable feeling. Although his strength was so weak that he didn't even have the qualifications to be looked down upon by many existences, his smile at this moment carried a strange light that made one's mind feel ethereal and couldn't help but revere him. Gradually, Lu Feng's laughter stopped. He raised his arm and extended his palm, as if he was feeling the changes of heaven and earth and the cycle of time. Finally, Lu Feng slowly opened his mouth. And it was also at this moment that the tranquil will was completely shattered, replaced by a sense of madness. It was a terrifying flame that could easily annihilate the heavens. It made people tremble, it was indescribable. I understand what you're saying. I understand. The world isn't a world of living beings. Its existence is ultimately an existence that sets the rules. Only the strong have the qualifications to set everything. They can make all the rules change according to their mental state. As long as they are strong enough, they can influence heaven and earth. One day, when I become the ruler of all living beings and reach the peak of the universe, everything in the universe will be under my control. If I make the human race prosper, then everything in the world will change for the sake of the human race. If I want all life to be extinguished, then the universe will collapse in an instant. All that changed was my heart at that time. Heaven and earth are heartless and treat all things as dogs because everything is created by heaven and earth. Whether it is all things in heaven and earth, the many intelligent creatures or dogs and ants, they are all just a part of the rules they set. In the eyes of the existence that created everything, all living beings and all things were the same. Therefore, there is no difference between the two. They are heartless only because they are strong enough. The saints are heartless and treat the common people like straw dogs. That's because the saints are great and created all living beings. According to the ancient legends, the 3 sovereigns ruled the world and the 5 emperors ruled the world. Their teachings were not only limited to the human race, but also to all living beings. They were the ultimate controllers of everything. Therefore, in their hearts, there was no difference between humans and dogs. They were all targets to be educated, and they were all part of the rules set by them. They are heartless because they are strong enough. Am I right? The voice gradually died down, but the reverberations continued to linger in Li Tianlai's heart. He had either heard or thought about what Lu Feng had said before. However, at this moment, when Lu Feng used his voice to speak, Li Tianlai's heart also rose and fell along with it. He responded to it unrestrainedly. His eyes became brighter and brighter, and his heartbeat became stronger and stronger. However, just as he thought that he had comprehended the same thing, a loud and clear voice rang out in the sky. The voice was still the same, but the will within it had completely changed. This time, it was filled with a loud voice that sounded like a harsh reprimand. In an instant, Li Tianlai was completely awakened from his contemplation. At this moment, Li Tianlai's back was dripping with sweat. He knew that if Dao Songtian had not spoken at the last moment, he would have fallen into Lu Feng's words and been unable to extricate himself for the rest of his life. At this moment, Li Tianlai looked at Lu Feng with a horrified expression. He had never thought that a person who had not even reached the level of a psychic grandmaster could rely on a weak sentence to make him, a demigod psychic master whose soul was almost deified, fall into depravity. This was extremely frightening. That harsh reprimand did not make Lu Feng's expression change. He was still standing in place. What he had just said was Lu Feng's path to transcendence. It was the truth that he had comprehended. Li Tianlai was right. If it had been the Lu Feng of the past, then no matter how talented he was, even if he had a talent development quotient of 2.5, 2.6, or even 2.7, it would have been impossible for him to walk his own path to transcendence so early. However, it was different now. Lu Feng was not the Lu Feng of the past. In the environment of 9 lives, he had experienced too much. These 9 lives were equivalent to him being reincarnated 9 times. Life was full of changes, life and death alternated, and the vicissitudes of time. The time that Lu Feng had experienced might not be comparable to the one life of those powerhouses. However, what he had experienced was incomparable to that of anyone else. Previously, Tu Tianxin's words had become a catalyst for Lu Feng's heart, which had already begun to comprehend, to complete a complete transformation. At this moment, after hearing Dao Songtian's words, Lu Feng seemed to have experienced the reincarnation of 9 lives once again. Gradually, he finally found it. He finally found his own path. In the distant horizon, a figure suddenly appeared. He was so indifferent. He was dressed in a green robe, and his snow-white hair draped over his shoulders. He was clearly standing in the void and clearly existed. However, even if one saw him with the naked eye, it was impossible to believe that he really existed. It was as if he was the entire world. Seeing the entire world was like seeing him. In order to see him clearly, one had to see the entire world clearly. He, Dao Songtian, one of the supreme overlords of the Federation, had finally arrived. He stood quietly in front of Lu Feng. His aged face hid a terrifying power. In the past, Lu Feng would not have been able to feel it at all. However, at this moment, after finding his own path, he had an inexplicable feeling towards the existence that had also found his own path. Although the terrifying power back then had made the entire universe tremble in fear and had been enough to dominate under the Divine King, Lu Feng did not have any intention of submitting to him. At this moment, he only had a completely equal attitude towards Dao Songtian. Although there was a huge difference in their strength, their realms were the same. They were both travelers on the same path. Although there was a difference in their start, they were both existences that had set foot on that path. Looking at Dao Songtian's eyes, Lu Feng was just as tranquil. That pair of eyes that could clearly see the world were constantly evolving with millions of changes. The stars in the sky began to appear and millions of starry skies were annihilated. This was a great vision. It was the strongest pair of eyes that no one could resist. With just one glance, Li Tianlai was completely terrified. He lowered his head deeply, not daring to look at his teacher's eyes. He knew that those were Dao Songtian's real eyes. They were the strongest pair of eyes that could destroy the world and create the world. He had followed his teacher for nearly 30 years, but he had only seen his teacher's truly great pair of eyes open twice. The first time was when he had exchanged pointers with the Divine King's ancestor, Yu. At that moment, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. The galaxy was in chaos. The entire void was swept by that pair of eyes. In an instant, it turned into nothingness and turned into dust. An entire galaxy began to collapse. At that time, it was also the first time he had seen a heavenly master. He had seen the terrifying power of the number 1 psychic in the Federation. And this time, it was the second time. However, this second time it was issued to a young and weak existence. Although he had exceptional talent, he was still just an ant at the moment. However, it was this ant that had shocked him once again. In the face of that pair of eyes that could destroy the heavens and create an eternal dusk, he was still smiling. He did not have the slightest intention of retreating. Was this still an ant? Could this still be an ant? Dao Songtian gently stood in front of Lu Feng. He allowed that pair of eyes that could destroy the world to sweep over Lu Feng. However, there was not the slightest bit of change. After a long time, he sighed softly. Your Tao is the path of the strongest. In your heart, only the path of the strongest is the eternal Tao. Therefore, the Tao that you have comprehended is the path of the strongest. Heaven and earth are heartless. They treat all things as straw dogs. Saints are heartless. They treat people as straw dogs. This is the truth passed down from ancient times. The benevolent see benevolence, and the wise see wisdom. In the eyes of the great sages of ancient times, they had experienced the true meaning of benevolence. Therefore, in their hearts, whether it was all things or straw dogs, they were all equally precious. Their heartless was not heartless towards all things, but true benevolence. Their Tao, the path that they saw, and the direction that they chose, were the path of great benevolence. In my eyes, all things are no different from straw dogs. What I see is inaction. Heartless is because I do not care. I do not want to interfere with any changes. I only want them to develop naturally. Therefore, I will not listen to any cries or prayers. In my eyes and heart, I only want them to develop naturally. Therefore, my Tao is the path of inaction. Regardless of whether it is the path of the strongest, the path of great benevolence, or the path of inaction, they are all Taos. Everyone does not know that the 3,000 paths are the 3,000 great Taos. As for us, we comprehend our hearts and feel our own existence. The ultimate goal of walking these 3,000 paths is to reach the end of everything. There is no right or wrong, good or evil, on the 3,000 paths. There is only one's own heart. If you believe in yourself, then you are right and righteous. It has nothing to do with anything else. Looking at the chuckling Lu Feng, Dao Songtian slowly closed his eyes. The next time he opened them, they had returned to their usual appearance. He chuckled and said, Lu Feng, congratulations! You have entered the Tao. Chapter 161. Dao Songtian's eyes flashed with a dazzling light as he looked at Lu Feng, who had calmed down and completely transformed. Previously, in his impression, Lu Feng was only a peerless genius who had the hope of breaking the shackles of that existence. If it wasn't for that hope, he definitely wouldn't have accepted Lu Feng as his disciple. After all, Dao Songtian had to go through the strictest test if he wanted to accept a disciple. He knew too little about Lu Feng. Even though he had accepted Lu Feng as his disciple, he still had some misgivings in his heart. However, when Zhao Kun told him about Lu Feng's performance, Dao Songtian was completely moved. His last bit of misgivings had completely disappeared. A strong soul was also a kind of talent. However, that kind of great willpower had nothing to do with any aptitude. That was a person's true inner reaction. With such a heart, as long as he didn't fall, he was destined to ascend to the highest heavens and become a true dragon. Therefore, he no longer had any misgivings about accepting Lu Feng as his disciple. Now, when he saw Lu Feng for the first time, he was satisfied. He was exceptionally satisfied. Middle-level psychic master and advanced warrior were the lowest ranks among the strong. However, among these low ranks, he had found his own path with just a few words. One had to know that he had only found his own path 100 years after becoming a sage master and experiencing the later chaotic era of the Divine King. This was already a great miracle. However, Lu Feng had found it just like that. This kind of disciple couldn't even be described as satisfied. Looking at Lu Feng, Dao Songtian finally asked slowly and solemnly, Lu Feng, are you willing to let me be your guide on this path? So that I can become your master. A master was different from a teacher. A teacher was only passing on to teach and dispel doubts. But the master had to teach and be responsible for his disciple's life. Dao Songtian had hundreds and thousands of disciples, and every one of them was a true leader of the Federation or those aristocratic families. But among these hundreds and thousands of disciples, there were only 4 who called him master. All 4 of them were famous overlords of the Federation. Even the youngest disciple was only allowed to call Dao Songtian master 100 years ago. In the past 100 years, Dao Songtian had devoted all his time to teaching his disciples, but he had never accepted another disciple. Now, he was finally going to accept a disciple. A true disciple. Li Tianlai looked at Lu Feng. At this moment, he didn't feel any jealousy. He had seen Lu Feng's performance. He had personally experienced everything that had happened. If it hadn't been for Lu Feng's strength, Li Tianlai would have had to address Lu Feng as a senior. After all, Lu Feng was a person who had entered the Tao. Jealousy was something that could only be felt by people at the same level. A beggar might be jealous of a billionaire, but they definitely wouldn't be jealous of those world-shaking powerhouses. After all, there was an insurmountable gap between them and those powerhouses. They didn't even have the right to be jealous. In Li Tianlai's eyes, Lu Feng was destined to be a great existence. The world was silent. Li Tianlai watched Lu Feng quietly, and so did Dao Songtian. They were all waiting for Lu Feng's reply. Lu Feng was extremely silent. He didn't say anything. It was unusually quiet. Finally, after pondering for a long time, Lu Feng lifted his head. He looked at Dao Songtian, who was calm and peaceful before him, and smiled faintly. Finally, he said, I am willing to become your disciple. Dao Songtian smiled from the bottom of his heart. Li Tianlai did the same. Everyone knew that it was extremely difficult to find a suitable teacher. Similarly, it was even more difficult for a teacher to find a suitable disciple. Lu Feng had far exceeded Dao Songtian's expectations in every aspect. Such a disciple was definitely the most perfect and satisfying one he had ever met. Therefore, even Dao Songtian wasn't willing to give up on such a disciple. However, just as the two of them were smiling, Lu Feng suddenly said, However, now is not the time. Dao Songtian was slightly taken aback when he heard this. However, he smiled a moment later. His smile became even brighter and even more satisfied. Li Tianlai, who was beside him, was a little anxious. He looked at Dao Songtian and Lu Feng and wanted to say something. However, due to his status, he hesitated and didn't say anything in the end. Dao Songtian waved his hands gently when he saw this. Then, he told Li Tianlai, Tianlai, you don't have to say anything. Just follow Lu Feng's plan. Lu Feng was a Dao inducer. Although his strength might not be comparable to Luo Yunyang's, his existence was already on par with Luo Yunyang's, the ancient sages, and the extreme powerhouses. Such a person had walked on his own path and steeled his heart. Once they set their minds on something, even the collapse of heaven and earth and the annihilation of time wouldn't be able to change it. Therefore, Lu Feng's decision was his decision. After speaking to Li Tianlai, Dao Songtian turned to Lu Feng and said, I know that you intend to become my disciple openly after next year's assessment. However, your strength is still a little lacking right now. You will learn from me during this holiday. After this holiday, I believe that given your qualifications, passing the assessment shouldn't be a problem. Lu Feng's talent development quotient had reached an all-time high of 2.4. This kind of talent development quotient didn't just represent a heaven-defying aptitude, it also represented a terrifying boost in battle. Dao Songtian believed that as long as Lu Feng entered the ranks of advanced telekinesis masters, then given his mind development quotient, even a peak advanced telekinesis master at the galactic level wouldn't be a match for him. He had confidence in Lu Feng, confidence that was strong enough. Upon hearing Dao Songtian's words, Lu Feng nodded. He knew that with the guidance of this quasi-void emperor existence, he would definitely have a qualitative improvement during this holiday. This was something that Lu Feng had already sensed before coming into contact with him. Now that he had seen it with his own eyes, and had stepped into the Tao under the guidance of this great being, Lu Feng's confidence had grown even stronger. However, you can already call me teacher now. After all, a teacher isn't a master. After you pass the assessment, I will officially accept you as my last disciple. Upon hearing Dao Songtian's determination, Lu Feng didn't say anything else. Calling him teacher was nothing in the first place. Therefore, Lu Feng bowed respectfully to Dao Songtian and said, "Greetings, teacher." Countless satisfied smiles could be seen at the corners of his eyes. Dao Songtian nodded and waved his hand gently to help Lu Feng up. Upon seeing this scene, Li Tianlai knew that there was no need for him to stay any longer. He looked at Lu Feng with a smile and said, "Little junior brother, congratulations. With your talent, you will definitely have a bright future after becoming my disciple. All right, I won't disturb your studies any longer. I will take my leave first." Even though Lu Feng had become Dao Songtian's last disciple, Li Tianlai would always be Lu Feng's senior brother. Although there was a difference in status, this seniority would always exist. After saying this, Li Tianlai looked at Dao Songtian, bowed respectfully, and said, "Teacher, I will take my leave first." Dao Songtian nodded gently. With a casual swipe of his hand, a crack appeared in the void. Li Tianlai didn't hesitate and directly walked into the crack, choosing to leave. After Li Tianlai left, Dao Songtian looked at Lu Feng. This was the first time the two of them had met. According to the normal procedure, they should first get to know each other. However, the two of them didn't do that. One of them was the #1 Psyche Master in the world. He could fight any virtual king, and was one of the top overlords of the human race, Dao Songtian. The other was the #1 Psyche Master talent in history. He was a terrifying monster who had entered the Tao when he was still a low-level powerhouse. Because they had entered the Tao, they seemed to have been familiar with each other for countless years. There wasn't the slightest gap between them. Dao Songtian said softly. At this moment, the formal learning had begun. "Lu Feng, I see that you have already reached the pinnacle of an intermediate telekinesis master. The most important thing for you now is to break through and enter the realm of an advanced telekinesis master. As long as you become an advanced telekinesis master, your strength will double. Before becoming a great Psyche Master, a Psyche Master's combat style is a mechanical confrontation. After all, before your soul manifests and your mind power materializes, you can't use any Psyche Master's technique." Lu Feng nodded softly. According to the normal procedure, without the materialization of mind power, it was impossible to construct the complicated lines of a Psyche Master's technique. In this case, a Psyche Master couldn't use mind power to trigger the power that existed in the void and cause great destruction. Similarly, if one's soul couldn't manifest, one's control power wouldn't be enough. Similarly, one wouldn't be able to outline and control those lines. That was why it was said that one could only learn some Psyche Master techniques after becoming a great Psyche Master. If it was in the past, Lu Feng wouldn't have cared. However, Lu Feng didn't think so now. When he became an intermediate Psyche Master, he had successfully manifested his soul. Although it couldn't leave his body, the existence of his soul was real. Since he could manifest his soul independently when he was an intermediate Psyche Master, it wasn't impossible for him to manifest his mind power when he became an advanced Psyche Master. After all, the main reason why mind power could materialize and manifest was because of the existence of the soul. Therefore, Lu Feng didn't hesitate and directly asked the question he had when he came. Teacher, I know this, but I still want to ask. What exactly is the activation of techniques and the materialization of mind power? Chapter 162. Lu Feng's question did not displease Dao Songtian at all. Perhaps for other students, taking things step by step was the best path. However, for an extremely talented genius who had entered the Tao at a young age, none of this existed. Those who had entered the Tao were extremely confident in themselves. They would not be arrogant and ignorant. Dao Songtian did not answer directly. Instead, he turned around. At this moment, he gently waved his arm. In an instant, an inexplicable force appeared in the void. These powers converged, and in an instant, they actually completed the fusion. At the next moment, Dao Songtian waved his hand again in the distance. Immediately, those forces that were formed by the condensation of these forces charged into the distance. The forces collided with the earth. Mountains and seas were overturned. The earth cracked. The entire sky and earth were completely covered by dust, forming a scene of dusk. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng's eyes bulged slightly. Such a scene was too shocking for him. That casual attack just now had reached such a level of power. Lu Feng understood that the casual attack just now was dozens or even hundreds of times more powerful than when he used all his strength to the limit. The two could not be compared at all. Teacher, this Dao Songtian turned around and looked at Lu Feng. He opened his mouth and said, "This is Dharma. The power that we, psychic masters, use when we cultivate is Dharma." Dharma? It turned out that after a psychic master successfully cultivated a psychic master's cultivation method, the power used was Dharma. The attack just now was completely launched with the power of a psychic master. During this period, there was no increase in strength. If it were a warrior, then it would be equivalent to a martial artist in the evolution stage using his cultivation method with all his strength. Lu Feng nodded. However, in the next moment, he revealed a confused expression. He could feel the power of this attack. It was dozens of times more powerful than when he used his strongest state. Back then, when he used all his strength and comprehended the existence of substance, his destructive power reached the level of 10,000 stars. 10,000 stars, even for a martial artist in the upheaval stage, the limit of their body was only 9,999 stars. These 10,000 stars were equivalent to the strength of an early-stage upheaval transformation expert. But now, Dao Songtian said that the terrifying killing that was dozens of times more powerful than his most powerful attack was only the power of a psyche master at the same level as a martial artist in the evolution period. Lu Feng found it hard to believe. Master, psychic masters and evolution stage martial artists are on the same level. Normally speaking, although psychic masters were more terrifying than martial artists, they were still no match for martial artists. However, your attack just now is not something that even a martial artist in the upheaval transformation stage can easily achieve. What is this for? Lu Feng's words made Dao Songtian smile. He looked at Lu Feng and asked, "Lu Feng, do you know what the ultimate limit of power is?" Lu Feng fell into deep thought. He had never considered this question before. Or maybe he had thought about it before but could not come up with an answer. The essence of power was a question that only gods would think about and pursue. For someone like him, who had not even reached the level of a martial artist or a psyche master, it was too early and too profound to think about this. Lu Feng shook his head gently. Dao Songtian did not take it to heart. He continued to smile and said, "In fact, the essence of power is the ultimate pursuit of all strong people. Their ultimate goal is to find the essence of power and the ultimate path. With the strongest power, they can reach the state of immortality and invincibility. All roads lead to the same destination. No matter if it's a Psyche Master, a warrior, or a warrior of other races, such as a heavenly martial artist or a machine, they all have the same destination in the end. This is just like us who have entered the Tao. Although the path is blocked, the final destination is to completely transcend immortality. Lu Feng nodded gently and looked at Dao Songtian seriously. He knew that if he were to rely on himself to comprehend it, it would take a very long time. Now that he had Dao Songtian's guidance, he would save a lot of time. In fact, no matter if it's a high-level warrior or a high-level Psyche Master, they can only be said to be people who wander around the periphery. These existences have not truly entered the palace of power. Therefore, in the eyes of many strong people, even the most powerful high-level warriors and Psyche Masters are still ants. Only when they start to comprehend power can they be considered as people in the eyes of strong people. The end of power is actually the law. The ultimate goal of all professions and all strong people is to rely on the power of the law to fight. The only difference is that on the path of warriors, they need to use the power of the law in the end, but we Psyche Masters are the law of enslavement. The law of enslavement. In an instant, Lu Feng took a deep breath and a shocked light appeared in his eyes. Enslavement, what a terrifying word. The existence of the law, he had heard about it until now. What kind of power was that? What kind of great and terrifying power was that? The existence of the law existed in the infinite time and space, in every corner of the entire universe. They were truly eternal and indestructible, not withering over time. No matter what kind of dangerous place it was, no matter what kind of abyss it was, the law existed eternally. Their power was omnipresent, too powerful. Warriors borrowed the power of the law. This was not difficult for Lu Feng to understand. After all, in the universe, only the power of the law was eternal. Only by borrowing the power of the law could one truly be the strongest, and only then could one use the strongest power without restraint. But why did Psyche Masters enslave the law? Why could they dare to enslave the law? This was really unbelievable. It starts when warriors enter the palace of power and become martial artists. They gradually start to come into contact with power. Substance, state, boundary, or the chi, force, intent of the martial artist level, at the level that only gods can come into contact with. They all move forward step by step and slowly start to come into contact with the essence of the power of the law. But Psyche Masters are different. From the beginning of Psyche Masters' cultivation, they have to enslave the power of the law. Our Psyche Master skills, the law that we use, is actually using the power of the soul to engrave the law of criminal detention that has been passed down for a long time, to bring out the power of the law and make it an existence that we can use. This is the difference between us and warriors. Lu Feng was silent and quietly pondered. At this moment, he was thinking about Dao Songtian's words. Perhaps it was difficult for others to understand. But this was not much of an obstacle for Lu Fenglai. After all, other than being a Psyche Master, he was also a venerable martial artist, and his martial artist level was even more powerful, to the point that he was now close to the existence of this state. Therefore, it was not difficult for Lu Feng to understand these words. Gradually, a look of understanding appeared on Lu Feng's face, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Everything was suddenly enlightened. Lu Feng looked at Dao Songtian and said with unusual seriousness, "Then, teacher, at the level of Psyche Master, Spiritual Psyche Master, and King Psyche Master, we strengthen the degree of enslavement of the law. But because we are too weak, the degree of enslavement is limited, and the power of criminal detention is also limited. It is also because of this reason we can't compare to warriors who progress step by step and borrow the power of the law. This is why when we are in the middle of the powerhouse level, Although we are strong, we still can't compare to warriors. A bright light appeared in Dao Songtian's eyes. He nodded but did not say anything. Lu Feng got Dao Songtian's affirmation and became more confident. The light in his eyes flickered, making people unable to look straight at him. However, once we enter the later stage of the powerhouse level, because of the terror of our psyche and the strength of our souls, we are already able to touch the core of the law. Therefore, when we enslave the law, the power of the law that comes from those lines will be incomparably powerful. But warriors are different. Because they are borrowing, the power that they attract is limited. It is also because of this reason that from the divine realm onwards, warriors are far from being our opponents. Lu Feng already understood this point. The law was like a millionaire. Psyche masters and warriors were like two different people. Both of them needed money, and the millionaire was the source of their money. The warrior was obedient to the millionaire. He would choose to borrow money from the millionaire. But the millionaire was too rich, so it was nothing to give him a little money. Psyche masters were different. They robbed money from the millionaire. In the early stage, Psyche masters were too weak. Their abilities were limited, so the money they robbed was limited. It could not be compared to the money they borrowed. But in the later stage, when they were strong enough, the warriors still borrowed. At that time, the amount they borrowed also began to increase. After all, the money of the millionaire was their own money. They might lend it, but in terms of amount, they would not lend as much as the warriors wanted. But Psyche masters were different. They still robbed. However much they needed, they would rob from the millionaire. Even if the millionaire was unwilling, all of this was not something they could decide. Everything was based on such a principle. Actually, whether a warrior or a martial artist is strong or weak, other than their own basic strength and level, the most important thing is who can borrow more power of the law and who can borrow less. Teacher, your realm is already extremely terrifying. Therefore, you can borrow as much power as you want. Therefore, the law at the level of a Psyche master can achieve the limit of enslavement power. It is also because of this reason that when both of you are using the same level of power, your strength is greater than that of a divine realm powerhouse. This, right? The light in Dao Songtian's eyes had already reached the brightest level. He looked at Lu Feng, full of strange emotions. At this moment, Dao Songtian was slightly absent-minded. Chapter 163. He had experienced too much in order to become the ultimate powerhouse that he was now. However, even after experiencing so much, he had never seen such a heaven-defying genius. He wasn't just terrifying because of his powerful aptitude. It was also because of his monstrous comprehension ability. Back in the day, he had also been guided by his teacher until he had become a pinnacle spirit master Wang. He had only understood this when he had almost become a demigod. However, Lu Feng had actually understood it now. He really didn't know what to say. However, Dao Songtian calmed down very quickly. How could someone who could enter the Dao at the age of 17 not have monstrous comprehension ability? As he thought about this, Dao Songtian gradually felt relieved. He nodded his head gently and said, "This is the essence of everything. The Psyche Master's technique that we Psyche Masters cultivate and the technique we use are essentially drawing a kind of formation pattern. Using these formation patterns as the core, we can extract the power of the precept for our use and create the most powerful destructive force. This is the true essence of the Dharma." The Dharma was both a Dharma technique and a Dharma array. Lu Feng listened attentively. Dao Songtian had already started to explain the true essence of being a spirit master to Lu Feng. A day passed very quickly. 2 days passed by quietly. 3 days felt like a dream. Before he knew it, Lu Feng had already been in the inner world that Dao Songtian had created for 7 days. During these 7 days, He had been listening to Dao Songtian's explanations day and night. Many temptations in his heart had suddenly been enlightened, and his comprehension level had increased by a large margin. After 7 days of explanation, Lu Feng felt that his comprehension of the Dharma had already reached a limit. It seemed like he would be able to come into contact with the existence of the realm in the next moment. Lu Feng believed that as long as he returned to the Lu family and entered the path of inheritance, he would be able to comprehend the intermediate portion of the Human King scripture. Then, he would definitely be able to comprehend all 10 realms in one go. Everything was baseless, but Lu Feng had this kind of inexplicable confidence. After 7 days, Dao Songtian let Lu Feng take a break. Although Lu Feng felt that he could continue, he couldn't go against Dao Songtian's wishes. Therefore, Lu Feng chose to rest for a few days and sort out his comprehension. Lu Feng, I'll give you a few days to relax. You've come into contact with too many things these days. If you continue to comprehend it, it won't do you much good. You should know that haste makes waste. So, let's relax. Lu Feng agreed and was finally sent out of the space by Dao Songtian. After walking out of Dao Songtian's inner world, Lu Feng stood in the hall on the top floor. At this time, Li Tianlai, who had received Dao Songtian's message, was already waiting here. Dao Songtian meant that before Lu Feng officially became his disciple, he didn't want anyone to know about his existence. Li Tianlai and Lu Feng's relationship was obviously closer. Therefore, Dao Songtian arranged for Li Tianlai to take care of Lu Feng for the past few days. Looking at Lu Feng standing in the same spot, his unusually calm and graceful figure, Yi Qingtang felt a chill run down her spine. A trace of envy flashed across Li Tianlai's eyes. However, this trace of envy quickly disappeared. Li Tianlai wasn't jealous of Lu Feng's treatment. He knew that if he were in Lu Feng's shoes, he would definitely not be able to achieve such an achievement. After all, his comprehension and talent could never be compared to Lu Feng's. Little junior brother, you're out. Seeing Li Tianlai walking towards him, Lu Feng smiled lightly and was very indifferent. He replied, Principal, I've troubled you these past 2 days. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Li Tianlai's face darkened slightly and said with a hint of displeasure, Little junior brother, although you haven't officially become my disciple, I understand that you will definitely become my last disciple. Not to mention then, even now, you've already called me teacher. So in the future, when there's no one around, you can call me senior brother. Lu Feng smiled kindly, nodded gently, and said, Then I'll have to trouble you, senior brother. Hearing Lu Feng call him senior brother, Li Tianlai's eyes finally flashed with a hint of joy. To be honest, he was very willing to get close to Lu Feng. Lu Feng's performance was witnessed by only 2 people, and he was one of them. The person who knew Lu Feng the best was not Dao Songtian, but Li Tianlai. In Li Tianlai's heart, Lu Feng's future was absolutely limitless. Although he didn't know if he could really break the eternal taboo and reach the peak of eternity, it shouldn't be impossible for him to reach the level of a heavenly master or even avoid emperor. Therefore, Lu Feng's future was bound to be the ruler of the entire Federation and the billions of races in the entire galaxy. Such a powerhouse had to be on good terms with no matter the price. Little junior brother, you've been here for 7 days. I haven't been treating you well. Just relax for the next few days and let me treat you well. After saying that, he didn't wait for Lu Feng's reply and directly pulled Lu Feng up the stairway to heaven. Of course, Lu Feng wasn't unwilling. Since he came to the capital administrative planet, he naturally had to take a good look around. He followed Li Tianlai out of the main teaching building and got on an unusually luxurious hover car. The 2 of them directly walked out of the school. Feeling the stable hover car and looking at the luxurious decorations, Lu Feng couldn't help but sigh slightly. He looked at Li Tianlai, who was driving beside him, and said, Senior brother, you're really rich. This hover car seems to be the Federation's top, original series, right? The original series hover car was the Federation's top hover car. A single car's price was more than 1 billion Federation dollars, and there was a price but no supply. If it was the previous Lu Feng, not to mention buying it, his parents' salary wouldn't even be enough for the minimum maintenance fee. Hearing Lu Feng's words, Li Tianlai smiled and said, "Junior brother, aren't you making fun of me? You're a direct descendant of the Federation's Lu family. This kind of hover car is nothing to you. If you want, the Lu family can provide you with a high-level or even a top-level spacecraft at any time. The price of that thing is at least a few thousand times more expensive than my suspension car." A top-level spacecraft's price was terrifying, and it was no less than any universe-level battleship. Of course, this level didn't only refer to the level of the spacecraft, it also referred to the terrifying price. A top-level spacecraft was already equipped with countless firepower systems. Even if it hadn't undergone any modifications, its firepower was no less than that of a powerful high-level battleship. In addition to the luxurious decorations inside, a top-level spacecraft's price was more than $1 trillion. This kind of price was definitely a terrifying number. However, Li Tianlai was right. As a descendant of the Lu family, although a top-level spacecraft was unimaginable for countless people, it was nothing to Lu Fenglai. Hearing this, Lu Feng didn't answer. He just shrugged lightly. He really didn't want to have anything else to do with the Lu family except for the Book of the Human King. As for using the Lu family's money, Lu Feng didn't have much interest in it. Until now, the special payment card that Lu Tao gave him was still in the Cymbidium. Lu Feng didn't even ask how to use it. The two of them drove the hover car and began to fly towards the city center. "Junior brother, in front of us is one of the largest cities on the capital administrative planet, Paradise City. This is one of the 7 largest cities on the entire capital administrative planet. In the Federation, it is also one of the top cities." Without Li Tianlai's introduction, Lu Feng already saw the city built by countless towering giant buildings in front of them. Lu Feng had some understanding of Paradise City. In the Cymbidium, the central city was the largest city. It was the only top city in the Cymbidium. Perhaps it was really huge, but compared to the top city in the Federation and even the Milky Way, there was still a big gap. In terms of size, Paradise City was more than 100 times the size of the central city of the Cymbidium, and the population, just Paradise City alone, was close to 1 billion. 1 billion people. This was almost equivalent to the total population of a level 3 life planet. Of course, with a huge population and a vast city area, it was naturally incomparably prosperous. Paradise City could be said to be one of the true microcosms of the Federation. Almost everything that the Federation had could be easily found here. Nearly 95% of the people living here were humans, and the other 5% were life forms of other races. They lived peacefully with humans here, standing aloof from worldly affairs. A top luxury car worth 1 billion naturally had a corresponding value. Coming out of the Federal University General Hospital, if one took the intercampus hover car, it would take at least 2 hours to see the edge of Paradise City. And the intercampus hover car of the General Hospital was already the top series of the Federation's intercampus hover cars. In terms of speed, it was not inferior to those luxury cars worth tens of millions. But even so, it still took more than 2 hours to reach the edge of the city. But by taking Li Tianlai's hover car, they saved a lot of time. In less than 30 minutes, the hover car had already entered the main road of Paradise City. "Senior brother, your car is really not bad. 1 billion is really worth its price." At this moment, Lu Feng thought of his fantasy series of hover cars. His car was considered good in the Cymbidium, but on the capital planet it couldn't even compare to a civilian car. When Li Tianlai heard Lu Feng's words, he smiled and said, "Junior brother, you also like this car?" If you like it, I'll take you to buy one later. It'll be a gift from me. When Lu Feng heard this, he paused for a moment, but he didn't show any expression of shock. After all, he was completely different from before. Looking at Li Tianlai, Lu Feng gently shook his head and said, "No need, if I want one, I can buy it myself." Chapter 164. Li Tianlai nodded his head gently and said, "Senior brother, you're the one who thinks too much. When it comes to money, even 100 senior brothers can't compare to you." Lu Feng didn't reply. 1 billion federal coins, if placed in an ordinary family, was definitely a shocking number. But to powerhouses like them, it was really nothing. Lu Feng only had less than 5 million Federation dollars on him. This was considered a small tycoon in Honglan City, but it was nothing on the capital administrative planet. It must be known that the price of a random 100 square meter house here was at least in the hundreds of millions. The more luxurious houses would easily be settled in the billions. Although he didn't have much money now, Lu Feng wasn't worried at all. This was because he knew that money was something that could be easily obtained as long as he waited a little longer. Once he became a telekinesis grandmaster or his mind power could materialize, it wouldn't be a big deal at all. In this place, he didn't want to owe anyone anything. Therefore, Lu Feng decisively refused. As they spoke, the two of them had already stopped. Li Tianlai stopped the hover car at a road with few cars and the two of them got out of the car. Li Tianlai pointed at the 1,500-story building in front of them and said, "Junior brother, it's already late. Let's go in and get something to eat." Lu Feng raised his head and looked at the huge building with a strange look in his eyes. This was because the hotel they were about to enter was called the Garden. Lu Feng knew that the Garden was a top-notch hotel chain in the Federation. However, he hadn't expected it to be this top-notch. The location of the Garden was definitely in the most central part of the city. The land here was already beyond the scope of an inch of gold. Moreover, this place wasn't something that could be bought just because one wanted to. Without connections to the heavens, even a square centimeter could not be bought. But here, for the flower garden to be able to occupy such a position and build such a luxurious superfloor, one could imagine how strong their influence was. They walked into the hall and quickly passed by a few attendants. These were all beauties, and they were definitely top-notch beauties. Lu Feng was not surprised by this. In the Cymbidium's flower garden, the waitresses were all beautiful women, and as the flower garden of Paradise City, it didn't seem like a big deal to replace the waitresses with top beauties. Li Tianlai took out a purple gold card from his bosom and waved his hand slightly when he saw a waiter walking over. The moment the waiter saw the card, he was slightly taken aback. But after a moment, he seemed to have reacted and his expression changed slightly. Soon, he contacted someone through the heavenly network. After he finished speaking, he carefully walked towards the two of them. Soon, the waiter walked up to Li Tianlai and asked carefully, "Honorable guest, is there anything I can help you with? Our manager is coming down soon. Would you like to wait for a while?" Seeing this, Lu Feng understood. He looked at the purple gold card in Li Tianlai's hand with a slightly strange expression. Lu Feng knew that the card should be the so-called VIP card, and it must be an extremely high-class VIP card to be able to make the manager of the Flower Garden of Paradise City personally come to greet him. However, Lu Feng didn't feel that there was anything wrong with Li Tianlai having such a VIP card. After all, Li Tianlai's identity was Dao Songtian's disciple. Although Dao Songtian had hundreds and thousands of disciples, to be his disciple was extremely noble. In addition, compared to the identity of Dao Songtian's disciple, among those forces, Li Tianlai himself was also worthy of such a VIP card. Li Tianlai was a demigod. The Federation only had about 50 divine powerhouses on the surface, and the divine powerhouses almost never appeared. Therefore, the existence of a demigod was extremely noble and great. Such an identity, even on a super life-bearing planet, was considered a top-notch existence. Other than those high-ranking officials of the Federation government or those who controlled the military, no one else's identity was comparable to a demigod's. The waiter spoke very quickly, and it was indeed very quickly. Not long after she finished speaking, a figure hurriedly ran over to this side. Looking at the figure, Lu Feng nodded to himself. Although his current strength was still not enough, after entering the path, Lu Feng's sensing ability had improved to an incredible level. He could vaguely feel that the manager was a warrior, and he wasn't even a low-level warrior in the evolution period. At the very least, he was a martial artist at the intermediate level or above. With such an identity, he was actually the manager of the flower garden. Lu Feng was really a little puzzled. Soon, the man came in front of Li Tianlai. After bowing respectfully to Li Tianlai in a manner unique to the circle of powerhouses, he slowly said, "Mr. Li, you're here. Is there anything I can help you with?" The manager obviously knew Li Tianlai. After all, Li Tianlai was also one of the most prominent existences in the entire Federal University because of Dao Songtian. Moreover, his own cultivation base had also reached the level of a demigod. In today's technologically advanced world, it was impossible for such an existence not to be recognized within one's sphere of influence. Li Tianlai gently waved his arm and directly lifted the manager up. He looked at the manager and said, "Clear out your top-class private room for me. This time, I want to invite my friend." In front of outsiders, because of Dao Songtian's previous instructions, Li Tianlai did not address Lu Feng as junior brother. After all, once he opened his mouth, those who knew his identity would definitely be able to guess Lu Feng's identity. After saying this, Li Tianlai directly walked towards the stairway to heaven. His identity was extremely noble, and he was one of the highest existences in the entire capital administrative planet. Heaven City was also the city where the Federal University was located. Here, his identity was even more prominent. Therefore, in Li Tianlai's opinion, there was no problem at all if he wanted a private room. However, just as he took the second step, the manager suddenly said, "Mr. Li, please wait." Hearing this, Li Tianlai stopped and turned around. However, this time, he frowned slightly. Looking at the manager who was sweating profusely, Li Tianlai asked, "What's wrong? Is there a problem?" Vaguely, Li Tianlai already felt a little angry. This time, he was the one who invited Lu Feng, and it was also the first time he invited Lu Feng. Among the strong, the most important thing was identity. In his eyes, Lu Feng was destined to become the strongest. Therefore, after coming here, he directly took out his VIP card and asked for the top-class private room. It was nothing more than a show of strength. However, the manager in front of him stopped him, obviously not giving him face. In his own territory, there were still people who didn't give him face. No matter how good Li Tianlai's temper was, he was still a little angry at this moment. As if feeling the anger in Li Tianlai's words, the manager's face was extremely pale. However, as if he thought of something, the manager still resisted the pressure from Li Tianlai and stuttered to explain. The two of them came at the wrong time. Before they came, the top-class private room had already been booked. Moreover, the identity of the person who booked it seemed to be no less than Li Tianlai. It was an extremely distinguished existence, otherwise, it would be impossible to book the top-class private room. At this time, the other party had already entered the private room, and it was impossible to let them leave. Therefore, the manager was in a dilemma. Hearing this explanation, Li Tianlai's anger subsided a little. He was not an unreasonable person. Since the other party had already entered in advance, he naturally couldn't say anything. After a while, Li Tianlai glanced at Lu Feng and said, "Lu Feng, I'm sorry this time. Since the top-class private room is no longer available, let's change to a slightly inferior one. I'll invite you again tonight. Lu Feng naturally didn't have any objections. He nodded gently. At this time, Li Tianlai looked at the manager and said, "Since the top-class private room is no longer available, let's change to a slightly inferior one on the top floor." However, when Li Tianlai finished speaking, he found that the manager's face became even uglier. At this time, his face became gloomy again. Slowly, with an unusually deep power, he said, "Could it be that those private rooms are also occupied?" If the manager said yes again, then Li Tianlai really had to consider whether someone was deliberately making things difficult for him. However, this time, the manager quickly said no. However, in the next moment, his face became even paler. Although he was a venerable warrior, a powerful one who was at least in the upheaval period, under Li Tianlai's demigod-level majesty, he couldn't bear it at all. Intermittently, the manager finally said, "It's like this. The guest doesn't like noise, so he hopes that no one will go to the top floor." Hearing this explanation, Li Tianlai fell silent. However, Lu Feng felt a powerful aura awakening from Li Tianlai's body. It was a kind of ignited anger, a powerful anger. Taking a deep breath, Li Tianlai tried hard to squeeze out a smile. He looked at Lu Feng and said, "Lu Feng, this time I'm going to make a fool of myself." Lu Feng already knew Li Tianlai's plan. Under such a state, Li Tianlai was definitely not going to endure. He was a demigod, a famous super powerhouse in the Federation, and a disciple of Dao Songtian. And this was where the Federal University was located. The entire Paradise City was almost built on the Federal University. To encounter such a situation in his own territory, whether it was because of Dao Songtian or his own identity and face, Li Tianlai couldn't endure it. Chapter 165. Lu Feng knew that it was useless to try to persuade him, and there was no need for him to do so. He looked at Li Tianlai and shook his head gently, indicating that it was nothing. Seeing this, Li Tianlai's aura slowly calmed down. However, Lu Feng understood that the principal of the Cymbidium branch, Dao Songtian's disciple, was completely enraged. Sure enough, Li Tianlai did not hesitate and walked directly towards the stairway to heaven. Looking at this scene, the manager's face turned pale. He reached out his hand to stop him, but after a while, he put down his pale arm. In the next moment, the manager suddenly took out his Sky network and anxiously dialed a number. As for Lu Feng, it didn't matter anymore. His status was incomparably noble, or perhaps he had not been able to adapt to everything in the past. However, after entering the Tao, everything no longer existed. He had already adapted to this most noble status. Behind him stood the Lu family, one of the two most powerful forces in the Federation. He was the principal of the Federal University, Dao Songtian, the strongest person in the Tao of Psychic. Based on his background, Lu Feng was so noble that no one could compare to him. He himself was an existence that had entered the Tao. Such an identity was a nobility that belonged to one's own destiny. Among the trillions of living beings in the universe, he was the only one who enjoyed the honor. The two levels of nobility and the transformation of his soul had changed Lu Feng at this moment. A noble status had to be matched with a corresponding status. Therefore, he could understand Li Tianlai's impulsiveness and would not stop him. With a casual step, he followed behind Li Tianlai and walked towards the stairway to heaven. The stairway to heaven in the Garden of Flowers in Heaven City was also the best. The architecture of the Garden of Flowers itself was not as terrifying as the main building of the Federal University. Therefore, it took less than a minute for the two of them to reach the top. Walking out of the stairway, Li Tianlai did not stop at all. He walked directly to the luxurious private room in the center. Lu Feng knew that Li Tianlai must have been here before. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to be so familiar with the place. After a few steps, the two of them arrived in front of the private room. Without any hesitation, Li Tianlai pushed open the luxurious door. You are? In the room, there were 4 figures sitting quietly. Among these 4 figures, apart from one who was clearly middle-aged, the other 3 were extremely young. Seeing Li Tianlai and Lu Feng barge in, a young man who was clearly in the center asked, "What's the matter?" Li Tianlai remained silent and scanned the people around him. Gradually, he took a deep breath and said, "This time, I'm treating a friend of mine to a meal. I heard that all of you have occupied the top floor. Isn't this a little too much?" If they had booked the top floor, Li Tianlai would be angry, but he would not be able to say anything. After all, they had already spent money. Although this was the city of the Federal University, Li Tianlai still had to pay attention to the image of the Federal University. But it was different now. The other party did not book the top floor. Their reason was that they did not want to be disturbed, so they cleared the place. Li Tianlai could not accept this at all. But even so, Li Tianlai did not lose his composure. As soon as he came up, he suppressed his anger and used a calm tone to state his purpose. Unfortunately, Li Tianlai's idea was good, but the development of the situation was not something he could control. Hearing Li Tianlai's words, the young man who spoke did not speak. He only frowned slightly. But just because he did not speak, it did not mean that the people around him did not speak. Another person who was equally young smiled lightly. It was just that this smile contained too much pride and sarcasm. "You said that you want a room here? Then, go and ask for it. Haha, none of us are stopping you. If you want, you can go ahead and do as you wish. Haha, haha." After the last sentence, he even faintly laughed. At this moment, he lost his composure. In Lu Feng's eyes, this was the image of a clown. Seeing him like this, the young man who seemed to be the most important person from before also frowned slightly. But in the end, he did not say anything. Li Tianlai did not speak. He just looked at the young man who was leading the group. His voice was incomparably flat. "What do you mean? Is it the same as him?" Li Tianlai could also see that this young man was the one who could really make the decision. His opinion was the one who could make the final decision. Hearing Li Tianlai's words, the young man frowned for a moment before completely relaxing. He did not look at Li Tianlai. Instead, he picked up the wine glass on the table and lightly took a sip. He slowly said, "His opinion is my opinion." Although he had already guessed the final outcome, when it really happened, Li Tianlai still could not help but laugh. It was an angry laugh. He looked at the 4 people in front of him with a cold smile and slowly said, "Good, very good. Since you have done this, then I have nothing to worry about." After a slight pause, Li Tianlai took out a crystal card from his pocket and shook it. He looked at the 4 people in front of him and said, "The 4 of you have strong martial strength. I suspect that you have ill intentions towards the Federal University. As one of the law enforcement teachers of the Federal University, I hope that you can come with me to investigate clearly. You all, come with me." Li Tianlai was a demigod existence. His power and status in the Federal University was definitely at the peak. After all, his teacher was Dao Songtian. As a former teacher of the Federal University, Li Tianlai relied on his strong martial strength to become one of the law enforcement teachers of the Federal University. And because of the uniqueness of the Federal University, as a law enforcement teacher of the Federal University, Li Tianlai in principle had the qualifications to investigate anyone around the Federation University that could threaten the Federal University. At this moment, seeing Li Tianlai show his identification, the 4 people all showed a strange expression. Even the young man who mocked Li Tianlai before was the same. Seeing this scene, Lu Feng suddenly understood that the young man was probably faking it just now. Sure enough, after seeing Li Tianlai's identification, the young man who mocked endlessly before had a serious expression. He looked at Li Tianlai and imitated the actions of the young man in front of him. He raised the wine glass in front of him and slowly took a sip before saying, not bad at all. Using the power in your hands to oppress others. Don't you think you're very overbearing? Hearing this, Li Tianlai's smile was still the same, but there was a hint of mockery. If it was someone else, I wouldn't do this. But the target is you guys. In terms of overbearing, it seems that I can't compare to you guys. They didn't even book the whole place. They just wanted to clear the place because they liked peace and quiet. This kind of overbearing was even better than Li Tianlai's. Li Tianlai's words let the four of them know that things couldn't be settled peacefully. They looked at each other and finally, the young man with the most distinguished status stood up. He looked at Li Tianlai and said slowly, you should understand that this so-called power is only for the commoners. For people like us with high statuses, everything is just a joke. To be able to become a law enforcement teacher of the Federal University's General Hospital, your strength shouldn't be bad. However, you can't be too strong. I can feel that your body is weak, so you should be a psychic. But even if you are a spiritual psychic or even a royal psychic, what can you do? A royal psychic is still in existence at the level of a martialist. At this level, a psychic is still unable to fight against a martialist. Here, we have 2 beginner and intermediate perfect stage martialists, 1 mid-stage upheaval stage martialist, and 1 peak evolving stage martialist. Even if you are a peak royal psychic, what can you do? Perhaps you want to rely on the power of the Federal University, but don't we have the power behind us as well? I think after knowing our strength, you should be able to understand what this means. Looking at their ages, these people looked like they were in their 20s and not yet 30 years old. But their strength had already reached such a level. Normal powers wouldn't be able to cultivate such geniuses. At the very least, only the peak existences of the first-rate aristocratic families could do it. Other than that, there was no possibility at all. First-rate aristocratic families were already the peak powers of the Federation, and the peak aristocratic families among the first-rate aristocratic families were probably the ones that even the Federation government had to give face to. If Li Tianlai was only a normal law enforcement teacher of the Federal University, perhaps there really wouldn't be a way. After all, the Federal University wouldn't have a conflict with a first-rate power just because of such a teacher. This was also within their expectations. Unfortunately, they were wrong. Li Tianlai wasn't the so-called psychic king, and his identity definitely wasn't just a law enforcement teacher of the headquarters. Seeing Li Tianlai's face turn slightly dark, that noble young man only thought that he had guessed Li Tianlai's thoughts. Therefore, he didn't stop at all and continued speaking. It's not convenient for us to reveal our identities, but I can only tell you that my family is an existence that even the Federation government has to give face to. Even if you are the higher-ups of the Federal University, it's nothing to us. Do you understand? He didn't look at Li Tianlai again, but only picked up the wine glass in front of him and lightly took a sip. At this moment, the entire luxurious private room was filled with silence and tranquility. The 3 young men opposite him didn't say anything, and only used the same gaze to look at Li Tianlai. However, the middle-aged man's expression was a little strange. Lu Feng knew that the middle-aged man that the young man was talking about was probably the middle-aged man. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.